This is not a video about Counter-Strike. This is a video about the business of gaming and esports in South Africa. So it's super niche and it's super weird. And I know you're thinking, what the hell am I watching? I come here for Counter-Strike news. I started my esports career and watching Counter-Strike in South Africa. And then I started working in Counter-Strike in South Africa many years ago. But it wasn't really a place where you could make it a career. So I left and I went overseas and I couldn't work in Counter-Strike for various reasons. And so I just did a bunch of other things. And then eventually, long story short, I ended up where I am now, which is working in Counter-Strike, which is amazing. And I'm very happy. But the point is, along the way, I started to realize a bunch of different things about where I came from, my sort of home country, and how different it was to the rest of the world. If you imagine what esports was for you watching like 7-8 years ago, that's kind of what it's like in South Africa right now. Lots of like dodgy snake oil salesmen and people promising to like, you know, promising everything, hopes and dreams, and then the balloon just popping and folks being left with nothing. It's a whole damn thing. And so anyway, what I wanted to do is I had a bit of downtime and I always panic when I have downtime. So I just start making content, and some of the content I made was a collection of interviews that I did with people I've worked with and people who I respect in the South African industry about their experience, and basically trying to gear it towards companies, marketers, investors who are looking to get into the gaming and esports space in South Africa, and kind of give them a true picture of what they're getting into. Because I feel like a lot of people, whether it be business owners or teams or creators or whatever, consultants, because there's so many consultants, kind of like mislead people. I wanted to make some content to kind of help and ensure that people like me didn't have to go through what I went through, and that things would change. I originally made these videos and I threw them up on LinkedIn and X and Spotify, but then I thought I would just smash them all together into one super long video and just put them up here on YouTube so that they're searchable forever, which is what this is. That's why it's like 2.5 hours of stuff, but there's chapters so you can go through them and you can click on stuff that you're actually interested in and take a listen. I'm well aware that for most people that come here, again, because you're here for CS and some memes, this might not be up your alley, but I'm hoping maybe somewhere in the world this helps someone, which is why I'm posting it up here on YouTube. And also because I'm currently at work and I have no content and I have this intense fear that my entire channel is going to die, and it's been growing and it's been so exciting and I've got to chat to you and I don't want it to die, so I'm just putting content up for the sake of putting content up, which is apparently the golden rule that you should never do. But here we are. So this is a very long video. Maybe it helps someone. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows? Welcome to a very special episode of Tech Girl Talks. It's a little bit of a different one this time because usually we're talking gaming and esports. We're still talking gaming and esports. We're actually talking the business of gaming and esports today. So predominantly focused on those in South Africa who are looking to get into the gaming and esports space from a business point of view and what the advantages or disadvantages are for them. So I thought it was important to bring an old friend of mine into the mix. Barry Louzada is not only an ex-professional player, but he is now the founder, and I don't actually know what his title is there, managing director, I presume, at Mettlestate, which started out as one of South Africa's premium tournament organizers, but has grown into so much more than that. So Barry, tell us a little bit about Mettlestate. What is it that you do?
Yeah, exactly that, Sam. It's like, you know, being an ex-gamer, you go into this saying, I'm gonna create a TO and run the best tournaments that money can buy, and do everything the way it should be done. And then after now 9 years, you start to realize that brands actually want more than just the TO elements of gaming. They want to understand how gaming works, how themselves as brands can get into the space of gaming. So while Mettlestate still does the esports tournaments and gaming elements, we also do strategy and elements around the gaming side of things for brands, because at the end of the day, gaming is so much bigger than just esports and tournaments. And I know, you know, that's always the big part of it, right? And I suppose that ties directly into your traditional sports like football and rugby. You know, those games are so much bigger than World Cups. So, you know, from a Mettlestate perspective, we've looked at trying to find ways to work with brands and engage with brands in an authentic way for gamers.
Do you find when you meet up with these brands that there is a little bit of a misunderstanding where they go, well, we want to be involved in gaming, but it's a little bit like going, we want to be involved in sport. They don't realize that with gaming comes all these other different things, and it's not it's not as straightforward as going, right, we're in gaming now, they've got to choose their game, choose their audience, choose their platform.
Well, I mean, exactly that, right? When you look at sport, like I mentioned, World Cups, that's already a pre-packaged kind of event. That's already been made. That's already been, created, and all that comes with that now is your tiered sponsorship levels and and the way that your brand can be injected into that space. When it comes to esports, it's about understanding that while you can have that physical event, you don't necessarily have to have that physical event. And when you look at the numbers of esports, I think a lot of brands are saying, well, how many teams are going to enter? Because, we need 5,000 or 20,000 people entering. And I suppose the same comparison you can use is you don't have 20,000 people entering the World Cup. So, you're looking for the audience, the people that enjoy those games, the people that watch those games, the teams. You're a host, right? And you host to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. When you're doing that, you're not hosting to the teams that are playing. You're telling the story, and I suppose that's what it's all about when it comes to gaming from a brand perspective. There's many ways you can kind of approach this, and there is the one element, which is the sponsorship element, and then there's other elements, for example, where you can do activations around gaming. You can bring a gamification element into whatever campaign that you're trying to bring to market. But at the same time, you've also got to understand that the audience that you're engaging with is not, it's not your typical above the line audience. They're not watching TV, reading newspapers, listening to radios. These guys are on their PCs. They're watching Netflix. They're listening to Spotify. And it's an audience that's willing to pay to not have ads or be engaged with, because they don't want, time is precious to them. But that is where gaming is so important, because contrary to popular belief, gaming is not this antisocial thing. It's a super social thing, actually. And gamers, they're very viral in the way that they communicate with one another. So as a brand, it is a difficult space to just say, oh, I'm going to do sports, because you have to approach it from a place of authenticity. As well as I do, Sam, we've spoken a few times where we've seen something and we're like, okay. But and that's not to the fault of the brand, but it's always about understanding that just because someone works for you that says they play games, it doesn't mean that they understand the strategy of gaming.
It's a very interesting take. And I suppose most of these interviews, if you're watching them, when it's a conversation around the gaming industry in South Africa, they ask the same questions. I've sat on many a panel where we say the same things. I don't want this to be that. So we're going to be talking a little bit more seriously, diving
100%.
down. I'm hoping if you're watching this, you've done a little bit of research about the industry. I predominantly work overseas in esports, competitive gaming. And like you mentioned, I've got to talk to very big audiences. And I sometimes worry here in South Africa that a lot of these brands, you've got an HQ that's is based in Europe or the States, and they're going, right, our strategy needs to focus on gaming because this is how big gaming is. And it is that big, just not here. Do you find that sometimes brands have a false expectations about what they're going to get when they're focusing specifically on South Africa?
You know what happens is the brand kind of sees esports and gaming as big, and it is to a certain extent, right? I mean, it's a massive audience. If you look at the numbers for League of Legends and Counter-Strike and all of those, Dota, the international. But when you talk about, gaming as a whole, when you look at the brands that work with gaming internationally, they are engaging wholesale with that event or whatever it is that they're doing. So their social media accounts are engaging with this event. They are approaching this as if you were. I mean, I think the easiest comparison is as a brand that engages with sports in South Africa. Because we're a very sporty country, whenever a brand engages or invests in sports, they engage wholesale. They tell the world, look at this, we're sponsoring rugby, we're sponsoring motorsport, cricket, whatever it is. But because there's this perception that gaming is so huge, what happens is brands come into the space of gaming, they want to. And rightfully so, they should want to, because it's the audience is ripe for the picking. But the reality is then they kind of step back and say, okay, gaming, show me what you can do. But it's not going to do that by itself. Gaming, as it does internationally, when it first started, we're talking 20 years ago, Paul was there, and he also went through the same difficulties when it came to explaining gaming and esports to brands. I can only talk to Paul because he's the only one of the guys I know that's been around as long as I have. As you can see, the beard gives it away. But the point is that brands kind of aren't sure where to step in. So like I said, they wait for gaming to kind of show me what you can do. But what brands need to do is get as involved in the space as they would on any other media execution or digital campaign or whatever it is, and support it fully. And I must be honest, I've started to see the change when I'm sitting down with clients and they're starting to trust that, we understand we know what we're doing. So we need to create a campaign for this brand with what exactly they're trying to achieve, and then use gaming to amplify that, to execute on that, and then creating the legitimacy around what they're actually doing. Because if you're kind of stepping into this half-hearted, we're dealing with an audience that already doesn't trust a lot of things on the internet. So, in today's day and age with AI out there doing everything that it does, people start to go, well, is this brand actually interested in gaming? Are they actually interested in what I'm doing? Or is it just another scam or something along those lines? But I think the most important thing is that, brands as a whole, if they do want to get into the space of gaming, they kind of need to do it properly and say, okay, we're going to try this and we're going to try it properly, because nothing was ever a success by just doing something half-hearted. I was about to say something else, but anyway.
I know what you were going to say. This podcast, you can do that, but I don't know if, for your company, you want to look a certain way. I get that. So this is an interesting one, though, where you mentioned that half-heartedness, though, of, do you think it is, with gamers specifically, they're quite a hard nut to crack? And I know that a lot of people like to differentiate between different levels of gamers and depending on the controllers, but for the, platforms, but for the most part, gamers are distrusting of brands entering the space. Do you find that a lot of brands come in and they want to do this little tester, and then maybe the tester doesn't quite speak to the audience, or it doesn't get the results, and they immediately pull back? Do you think that there needs to be more messaging about, hey, if you're coming in here, this is not, you can't dip your toe in, you're going to have to put your foot in the water?
Yes, I mean, absolutely, because and I obviously want to extrapolate that, because that sounds, and that's not what you're implying, but it sounds like, okay, cool, we need to throw a lot of money at this, and that's not necessarily the case, right? It's more about understanding that if you're going to do this, then you need to commit to doing this, and exactly what you're saying, the audience as a whole is generally mistrusting, right? And you look at TikTok, and some of the most popular TikTok is about fact or cap, and whether it's real or not, or because every day there's something. How many times have you seen the Mentos in the Coke bottle or the Pepsi bottle? I still to this day haven't tried it. I've seen a lot of people do it, so I still don't quite know if it actually happens or not. But when you're a brand and you're going to do something, even if you're investing 20,000 Rand into a campaign, or 5,000 Rand, whatever that amount is you need to say, okay, we're going to do this properly. We're going to post, we're going to get it behind it. We're going to do whatever it is, because at the end of the day, it's your brand and how you're showing up in this space, and there is a huge audience there. They're an untapped audience. You're talking to your audience of 1 million or 2 million people on social media, but right now that audience is younger than what it was when you started this whole exercise. And how are you engaging with that younger audience? How are you showing up to that audience? And they are mistrusting. They most certainly are. I mean, I don't even know how many times we've been approached and told, no matter how many times we've given away cash and money for competitions and prizes, that we've been called a scam, and it's not real from a Mettlestate perspective. But I mean, as well as I do, Sam, we've been around for almost 10 years now, and we're yet to, I think there was that one incident where the guy didn't get his 500 Rand, but it becomes
definitely a scam. There it is,
100%. But I suppose it's not necessarily, it doesn't equate to financial investment, but rather as a brand, if you're going to approach this, approach it with your eyes wide open.
So obviously I know that you're going to want to sell your business in this case, but I'm hoping we know that there is a Mettlestate promotion, but I'm hoping you'll give me a more broader answer to this. I find that specifically in the gaming space, we have a situation where a lot of agencies, marketing companies, influencer managers, they've seen that this is something that brands are interested in, so they automatically add it to their list of things they can do. We can help you with gaming.
Yes.
And sometimes we see these campaigns happen where it's pretty clear that the people working behind the scenes, maybe they play some Candy Crush, but when it comes to gaming as a whole, maybe they don't quite understand the audience they're reaching. If you are a brand and you're going, okay, this is a space we want to play in, what are the key questions you should be asking your agency or your PR company or whoever it is that is going to help you move into this space?
I suppose the way you want to the way you'd want to approach this is to kind of get some experience, get some ideas as to what this company or person has done before when it comes to gaming. It's not as simple as, plopping down a couple of sim rigs or a PlayStation and there we go, we're now in gaming. And it's also not a case of running a fully fledged $1 million esports tournament. It's about the holistic approach when it comes to gaming. As Mettlestate, and I always look at how we do things quite critically when it comes to, could we have done that better? Could we have improved it? I mean, Sam, we've spent, and we've known each other for a while, but we've spent times where we've worked on the same project together, and after the day's work, we've kind of sat down and WhatsApped each other and said, like, how was this? Should we do that? And it's about understanding that whichever agency or brand, esports or gaming company that works in the space, and there are a few of them, like you've pointed out, and you need to understand what level of work have they done, how are they capable of doing, because in my experience over the last couple of years, it's also about the execution of these events. What brands have they worked with? Reporting, has this company been able to supply reporting? Gaming companies they're not performance agencies. They're not going to get you 20 million impressions. I mean, if you want that, there's agencies that do that. There are tools that do that. From a gaming perspective, it's bringing you a new audience. It's bringing you a very loyal, fiercely loyal audience. It's bringing you a very engaged audience. And it's exactly that way. It's how Mettlestate gaming is approached in that space. One of the things why I started gaming or Mettlestate is that you've seen it as well when you're watching a broadcast in South Africa and there's a caster sitting there with his bed in the background and it's unmade, and you've spent time setting yourself up to look professional and kind of approach the space professionally. And I think the way that you've actually brought yourself into esports is actually a story that a lot of people need to know and understand. And the only reason I'm saying this is because it actually intrinsically ties into what you should be looking at when it comes to this, is that Sam Wright was a blogger, a tech blogger, and she made herself known in the space. She would go to these gaming events. She started to ask the questions, ask people, look for people that knew what they were doing, knew what they were talking about. And, people they can do what they want, say what they want, but at the end of the day, Sam, you took it to the next level on your professionalism and the way that you approach the gaming space. And the same is true for any agency or gaming company that you're looking for. Is this agency professional enough to take you to the next level when it comes to authentic way of gaming? There's a very famous soft drink that was out there that did a very gamified advert around esports and gaming, and I'm not going to mention it, but the point is the game and the esports connection did not match, and 95% of gamers, whether they were esports or not, kind of looked at this and went, "Oof, that's a big oof," So it's about whether that agency can do what needs to be done from that perspective. So also, it comes down to whether they have the staff to execute on this, because when you're talking about big brands like Sundowns, where we've worked with them, we've worked with Intel, Doritos, a 2-man band or a 3-man guy who plays FIFA on his couch is not going to be able to execute on what the brand itself needs, to execute in shops around the country, or put off a big esports tournament, or broadcast or production, video editing, design, development. All of those elements are crucial to esports and gaming.
Very good answer. And it is interesting because there's maybe, I'd say, 2 or 3 gaming and esports companies that have been around for more than 6 or 7 years and have that sort of experience. But what's interesting is, obviously, I mean, you mentioned my career. If I look back to where I was in 2017 when I started, I was horrifically bad at my job. I've looked at those things. I didn't know what I was doing. I made mistakes along the way. There's some events where people bring them up and I cringe. I actually, today, someone brought up, I think it was Cape Town Rage. I agreed to do a charity game where I played Call of Duty with a controller. I can't play with a controller. At that point, I don't even think I had a PlayStation. I'd only ever played on a PC and mouse. I made a complete fool out of myself. I cringe when I think about that. And I think that that's interesting because, obviously, there is the downfall of when you've been around for a very long time and you started in an industry that was very new, you've obviously bumped your head a bit. So there's been mistakes that have been made along the way. If you have to look at the duration of your time sort of steering the ship of Mettlestate, what do you think are the key lessons that you've learned in this space?
It'll always come down to how you're gonna sell gaming to a brand. It's always going to be something different. Each brand has something unique that they're offering, whether it's a FMCG, fast food, it's a drink, it's a bank, it's a telco. Each brand is trying to achieve something unique or kind of have their own KPIs. And it's about taking the time to understand that. When I first started, I thought I can just do esports tournaments. You want to get into gaming, this cup, that championship, this, and it really isn't the only way to get into gaming. I think that is the most valuable thing that I have learned in my 25 years in gaming, and understanding that when I was a gamer, it was exactly that. I will never forget the brands that what I felt had invested in my gaming career. I sat there when my mom said nothing would come of gaming. Bless her heart. She supports me. But, as a parent, when your 18-year-old or 19-year-old kid is just sitting playing games all day, you fear the worst. But when it comes to brands, it's about how you can authentically, and I keep saying this, get them into gaming, because there are some very inauthentic ways to kind of get into gaming. And it's about having someone that's going to sit down, understand what you're trying to achieve, and then find a way to get into that space of gaming. There's always going to be a way to incorporate gaming. You know as well as I do, Sam, that you sometimes just look at something and you go, if this was being done, it would just make it so much more insane or elevate it so much more. But that's the one thing. And then obviously the reporting, understanding the numbers, understanding what you've actually achieved and gotten out of this. You have to have some kind of benchmark to see that you've gotten something really tangible out of this. That being said, like I said, gaming is not just about the esports. And this is coming from someone that invested a very big portion of his life to competitive esports. That's not taking anything away from the competitive esports scene at all. There's a place for it. There's a place for that professional rugby competition or cricket tournament or esports tournament. It's what keeps the fans wanting more. But they're still playing those games, and they're not playing them like the South African rugby team or like Australis is for whichever game they're winning at any given time. So that just shows how much I know about the professional space at this point, because I've started to focus more on the less serious elements of gaming.
Is there a big gaming market though in South Africa? Because many would argue that maybe it's actually not as big as people expect it to be because of some of the socioeconomic conditions that affect us?
I think if I'm answering that question honestly, I would have said no, there isn't, but I believe that there actually is. And I'm not talking about a Counter-Strike or a League of Legends or a Dota 500,000 Rand tournament style of people, but when you have 3,500 Call of Duty mobile teams sign up for 1,000 Rand event, you must know that there has to be gamers out there. We're just looking at it from a position of ex-esports player, right? Barry, who's traveled the world playing at all these different places, but all of a sudden you start to realize that mobile in South Africa is huge. And you have to take into consideration that almost every publisher out there has developed a mobile version of their game. So you look at League of Legends, which is Wild Rift, Sideswipe, Rocket League, Call of Duty Mobile, PUBG Mobile. I can go through a whole list of them. They're all there. Some of them are actually even in that new esports World Cup element that's happening in Saudi Arabia. We've just been asked by a brand to look at doing an African mobile tournament. So while we can look at it from a traditional sense, from a PC element, I would say no. There are not a lot of gamers in PC. Hell, there aren't even a lot of gamers in console, but there are a shit ton in mobile. And that's where you need to look at it, because at the end of the day, gaming is gaming, whether it's on your mobile device, on your PC. Mobile devices are able to pull some crazy graphics and gaming experiences that are similar to PC.
Do gamers buy though? Because I mean, that's the big thing, right? At the end of the day, if you're I don't want to mention brands, but if you're the chip brand or the cold drink brand, what you ultimately want at the end of the day is for people to be eating your chips and drinking your drink. Are they loyal in that regard?
I think they most certainly are. I mean, I can only speak from my side and the gamers that I know as a whole, and I can't speak to brands, but energy drinks, we had an energy drink fridge in our studios. I could not get my team to drink that brand of energy drink. They came in with the direct competitor and they poured it into cups and mugs because I was like, cool, whatever, I'm not going to change your mind on this, but just, and you know that we do that because it's part of being in partnership. But I think that if you are in the space authentically and you kind of approach the gamers in that way, they do spend. If you look at most games, they are developed to be free. You can download these games for free. The way that they're making money, cosmetic items, in-game transactions. How can I boost my battle pass? What can I do to get this cosmetic item so that I look dope in game or whatever it is? But at the end of the day, gamers are still consumers, and that's another important thing to understand. Is brands kind of put these gamers in a little box in the basement where the curtains are closed and there's no one there. But gamers are you, me, and all of our mates and people that we know. Paul, Shocks, all of these people that we know, these famous. I mean, I'm saying names that 95% of brands, and I said this to you before, is that you'd be surprised. People think they're influencers, people think they're big in the gaming scene, and then you sit in these meetings and brands are going, yeah, I don't know this tech girl person you're talking about, or yeah, I don't. And I mean, that's the thing, is like, brands aren't on the inside of gaming. So when it comes to loyalty, yes, I think they are. I'm a middle-aged guy. I don't want to say my age, but I'm 43, and I still to this day have the love for the brands that I have. When it comes to my setups, everything that I buy is related to my choices that I made as a young gamer, and which brands I felt had invested in me as a young gamer. Because at that age, when I started gaming, I was coming into a space in my life where I had to start to make my own decisions. What toothpaste am I going to buy? Which insurance company am I going to go with? Can I stay with this bank or move banks? And that is what is happening here. It's about getting this audience when they are still impressionable and making those decisions. And they just, like I said, it's one thing that I stand by, is gamers are loyal. They are loyal people.
final question. I'm going to put you on the spot here because I think this could be quite fun. So I am the marketing manager for a non-endemic product, so something that is for mass consumption. Let's say a very tasty protein bar. Okay, so it's meant to be a snack, but it's also a healthier option. It's quite a premium product. Protein bars tend to be quite expensive in South Africa anyway. So I now feel that I can tap into the gaming market because I've been spending all my money on the fitness market, let's say. So I'm coming to you now as this marketing manager going, okay, I'm scared. I don't know if gaming is where I need to play. My mindset of what a gamer looks like, they're not necessarily someone eating my protein bar. What would be your advice to me as a brand? Where do we start? What do we look at? Are we sponsoring a team? Are we doing an esports event? What is it that we should be doing to test that market?
To be completely honest, I would look at doing something digital, something that's simple, that can be quite cost effective when it comes to how this energy bar shows up in the space, targeting specifically gamers in the gaming space in South Africa, potentially doing some kind of social media giveaway so that you're kind of engaging with this audience and gamifying that element through social media, and then taking it month by month to kind of see how we approach. I would never ask or expect a protein bar to kind of sponsor an entire esports tournament or even suggest something like that, but potentially find ways that they can leverage and piggyback off of bigger events. Maybe come in as the official protein bar supplier for a team or for an event, come into a Rage or a Comic-Con and not even take a standout, but maybe have some influencers walk around with protein bars, good looking influencers, not like me. I wouldn't look like a guy that takes backs protein bars, but even as we sit here and talk, you're not, because there are literally 1,000 ways that brand can get into the space of gaming without actually having to hand over 100,000 Rand cash prize pool for some esports tournament that just is not authentic to that protein bar ever. But they can most certainly, I suppose the way a protein bar kind of shows up in the gym space is we're supporters, we're here to support what you're doing. And maybe the protein bar can be, every gamer's wingman to help them maintain that energy while gaming in a healthy way. So, yeah, just an example. I'm here all week.
Oh, there we go. There's a protein bar somewhere. Here we go.
You're welcome.
There's a strategy. Yeah, push that out. Obviously, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments this video. I'm sure Barry, other people at Mettlestate, or people in the esports and gaming industry will be more than happy to answer and try and assist you. Thank you so much for your time. I really like the insight that we got, and I'm hoping that it gives more brands a little bit more of a clear indication of how they can enter the space here in South Africa. Welcome to a very special series here on Tech Girl Talks, a little bit different to what I usually do on the podcast. It's a little bit more business orientated, and obviously I wanted to go home to where I grew up and where my esports journey began in South Africa, just to talk about the landscape there and how esports and gaming has developed over the years. Joining me today is a face that a lot of South Africans will remember, and if they don't remember, in the back of their head they'll be like, he looks familiar. Kamza, you were you were my staple in my childhood on the TV. Right. You worked as I don't want to say child actor because it feels like a little bit insulting, but like you were a presenter on probably the biggest kids TV show in Southern Africa for many, many years. Yeah. And then from there, you went on to, I started seeing you on the stages at gaming and esports events way before gaming and esports events were even a thing. Let's get your gaming history in. I think that you started with interviews and hosting at Rage. How long ago was it?
Oh, it's a long time ago. Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me on. I think definitely in my high school, towards the end of high school, that's when, because working on KTV, you're getting exposed to the likes of the sponsors and brands who want to work with you guys. And Electronic Arts was in the country at the time. They had an office, when you were on the, the N1, those offices that look like houses on the side, close to Rivonia. They used to be based there. And I started the journey with them because they needed someone to do FIFA Interactive World Cup, which was a thing back then. And I literally went from first competing in it and like kind of emceeing with them. And then when I placed fifth, I was like, you know what, forget it. Like the gaming thing's not for me. Not a bad showing, but let me focus on getting in on the live eventing space. And so that was kind of like the natural thing of, let me go for the guarantee check by being the MC instead of trying to place in the top 3 to get a prize money, So I was just like, all right, all in on the live space stuff. And then, yeah, from there, the momentum just kind of started, We were doing like malls. It was back in the days when everything was like LAN, right? So no qualifying online. You pitched up at a mall, you got into the queue, you got registered, and that's how, my journey began. And so from those days of kind of like first wanting to participate and being part of the hype to just saying, okay, you know what? There's probably a future in just being the guy who, oversees the whole thing. So from a presenting perspective, I said, okay, let me lean into that. And then the journey began. And so obviously over the years, things have changed with some of these companies having a presence, then moving out, then distributors coming in. So, things have moved. And unfortunately for us, I don't think we were there at the time when these companies could have kind of cashed in on that, So I guess there's a bit of a journey now to get some of them back into the country and fully invested instead of having them, kind of work through satellite operators and whatnot. I think that's when you kind of know as a market that a company or, developer or publisher takes you seriously when they have a presence in your country. So it makes it easier to part with your money when you know that they, A, are providing jobs in the local territory, and B, that they see you. Because right now, it just kind of feels like we're here and they'll take our money at times, but not really be fully invested in helping to develop our scene, which, if we're honest, we're still a while away from being like other parts of the country, well, the world rather, where, the sales are huge. Obviously our socio-economic situation means not everybody has money to be buying games. Even though people do game, they'll find the cheapest way to do it, be it on mobile, be it unfortunately on pirated games, but people want to be a part of it. So I think it needs partners who get that listen, we're still kind of building. Even though we look the part, there's still things that need to be tightened up and maybe improved upon before we can be considered like a serious world player.
I think it's really fascinating that you picked up on the publisher argument, because this is something that I think a lot of new people entering the space don't realize is back then when online purchasing wasn't really a thing, it was all about hard copies. We did
100%.
have a presence from the publishers, and they were here. They were investing because hard copies did sell here. And obviously with the change to online and our data issues, that's obviously changed. But what's interesting is back then, and I think back to Rage, so a lot of people will think we're talking about that matric back in December. No, Rage is, is a gaming
expo. That one.
That was a once a year thing. And one of the things that we got in South Africa was all of these publishers came in with code of games that were about to be released. Rage was set up at a particular time where it was just before the December games got dropped. So a lot of these publishers would fly to South Africa to showcase these games. Do you think with the change to online, it was almost like we saw a little bit of a game drain in South Africa? Did you experience that?
I think so. I think obviously, in a very competitive space for these publishers and companies, they're always looking at how to kind of save costs and minimize, spending money. And so I guess, for them, it's a bit of a boon to have this thing move online, because it means that just more data centers than personnel are required, right? So you have that. And I kind of get it. But at the same time, I feel like, someone, if not a body, but someone should be fighting for the fact that, listen, if you want to sell in our country at the bare minimum, this is what you should have in place, So we feel like you were contributing. It's similar to how people are like, yeah, there's that one satellite TV provider that everyone kind of wants their downfall of. I'm like, cool, that's all well and good, but you know how many people they, employ compared to the competitor that you love so much, who pretty much keep a skeleton almost staff in comparison? So I think sometimes people lose the perspective that, okay, it's cool to have these light, agile looking businesses, but it's usually in their own interests and not to the benefit of the people in the country in which they operate. So I'm not one for a lot of bureaucracy, but I do think sometimes if you want to come into a space got to play a little by the rules of, everyone else. So the example on the TV side is that you have a company that's entrenched here, employing thousands of people and contributing to the fiscus in a big way, to those people getting paid and so on and so forth. So I just think that if companies want to play here, it shouldn't be a thing of like, we'll do as little as possible to get as much as possible out. But the question then becomes, who fights that battle? Because, as much as we've seen those maps where we're slighted and the times that are released don't show anything in Africa, what happens? The game still gets bought. So they don't have an incentive to say, okay, cool, we need to focus. It's almost like we have to apply pressure, which is very difficult. I have this discussion with my fellow sports gamers. Don't buy these games. Let them get better. And lo and behold, people buy them, And I think it also comes from a time where I know better. I've seen these games in a better state than they are right now. So you know that it's possible. How can you have games come out 10, 15 years later with less features than they had back then? When the machines are stronger, when the companies are making more money, people will say, oh, no, they only have a year to make a game. It's like, yeah, fine, but they're making tons of money in that year. So expand the team, look into the other modes. Don't trick us and, bait and switch where we buy a game and realize that 99% of your focus is on one game mode that happens to be the most profitable. Gamers and people aren't stupid. They see this. But at the same time, there's a new era of gamers who only know this type of interaction with a game, who only know that I need to put money into something to get something out. And you and I come from a generation where it was like, listen, the game comes out, you play it, maybe you throw some money at it, but it's not necessary to, because once it lands in your lap, it's a complete, fully cooked product. And I think we're in the age where we're not getting fully cooked products. They're coming out, with developers and publishers thinking, well, we're going to just, hit that day one patch or keep on patching it. And it's almost because now it's all digital, they have this, opportunity to re-roll the dice. Whereas when it was a physical copy, they just had to get it right out the gate. And I think, it's fine to go digital, but at least have the pride and care in your work from that physical era. That means that the first day this game comes out, it's a proper product. And once I pay you my fee for buying that game, I get a full game. I think that's where we just need to get back to at a bare minimum.
So this for me is obviously that we see all the stats and they say gaming in South Africa is growing. There's so many gamers, but what you've touched on is something that I think no one really speaks about, is that the access to these new games is so limited because if you're not constantly online, updating all the
100%.
time, you have to have great internet. You don't get to enjoy that. So a lot of the gamers that I speak to while they're there, they've either got one game that they're dedicated to, or they're playing an older version of a game because they know that they don't have to update it every single day or stress about the data costs. Have you experienced that as well when you're chatting to other gamers?
Yeah, I think, that definitely South Africa, data is a big, pain point for people. I think, we take it for granted because we're in the scene. So we're always connected just because it's kind of a tool for our work. But I can see people, be it on Reddit or online, who just like bulk at an update that's like 50 gigs, just to change maybe one or two things. And sometimes it's not even in the gameplay. It's like things that they just need to change under the hood. So you get this frustration of like, okay, every week I'm having to get a new, bigger, bloated version of the game onto my system. And you're right. I find myself, now that I'm on PC, having moved from console, I'm playing a lot of old school games and also games that have maybe been out a while where, yes, when they were released on day one, they were in a terrible mess. But because you've waited them out, they've been updated. And in most cases, they're even cheaper. So I don't even see the incentive in this day and age, unless you're a real big fan of a franchise, to buy a game on day one. I think, now it's a case of wait and see. And so now it's that case of who's going to blink first, because we're obviously trying to put pressure on the people who make the games. The people who make the games are thinking, oh, well, are we going to maybe try harder? So I don't know I don't want anyone to lose from this. I think, it's a moment for us to maybe all gain and say, listen, tighten up on your side. Then you'll get day one support. Don't do weird things like embargo reviews because you're afraid that, the truth might come out, or you allow people to play sections of the game and not know that there's sections coming that are going to be monetized. I think, there's a bit of a weird relationship that needs to be a lot more open and say, listen, here's the game. Here's how we want to improve. For an example, I see the guys with Rabbit who've been given a lot of stress about the AI thing. But if I listen to those developers and I see their moves, they're listening, they're looking to improve stuff as soon as they can. Whereas, in gaming, you'll have guys screaming on forums for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. One mode gets fixed immediately. Other modes, they take their time. Meanwhile, both customers have paid the same price for the game, right? So these are the things that we have to contend with. And so I don't know. It's a tricky one because no one's not going to buy the game. And that's really the only way you can hurt these companies is in the pocket. But so many people are used to the cycle, and it's the only thing they've been exposed to. So they don't know any better. So it's tricky because you got like the older generation saying, come on, guys, pull up your socks, to the younger generation saying, well, I don't see anything wrong with this. And so how do you marry those two worlds?
My dog clearly agrees with you because I can hear her barking in the background, so apologies.
It's all good.
I want to go back into the business side specifically from a South African perspective. So this is really interesting because while I was figuring out what I wanted to chat to you about, I started thinking when I got into the content creation / MCing type of space, there were only 2 people doing it in South African gaming, and it was yourself and Pippa Shabalala, which actually, I hate the diversity conversation because I feel like sometimes it's overdone. But the irony is we were pretty diverse back then. Like the only 2 people doing it hit the checkpoints, if you like, that brands feel they have to check now. But I was like, we were there. We never had to change that up. But
for sure.
I am curious as to how it changed for you, because back then, did you feel like you were respected if you were in the gaming space? I mean, you obviously had a TV background, which helped, but did you feel like maybe that content creation space and the hosting space in gaming in South Africa, maybe the skill itself wasn't really appreciated?
Yeah, I think obviously, for me coming out from a TV background, well trained and kind of being, put in front of a crowd or having a script in front of you and kind of being able to, speak about it in a way that's your own. I think what I like about now this new generation is that they have the things that they're passionate about to speak about. I think, now there's games that are niche but have a following. And so people can really then sharpen their sword doing stuff that they like. And I think that's important. That's how you get better at like being able to speak with confidence, is speak to what you know first, right? And you might get tripped up and get the ball between your feet, as they say in football, whilst developing. But it is, an important part of the process. I was a presenter first, a gamer second. I had to find a way of kind of, putting those together. But then that made me the envy of everybody at that time. I remember I used to do the music show and the gaming stuff at KTV. So already, like a lot of kids are looking at me saying, listen, you are literally, the first person to try out all the cool games, to speak to all the cool artists. So I had that. And it being a kid's environment meant that, it wasn't as stressful. It meant that, you're allowed to grow at your own pace and develop with some of the best, direction and guidance from people. And I think that's very important, is that sometimes, these kids are operating in a vacuum where no one's able to feed back any, constructive criticism or tips. And so, how it works, bad habits become even worse over time because they get reinforced instead of being ironed out the system. So I think, maybe if you're watching this as a youngster, it's just to be critical and stay on the review stuff. I know sometimes it's difficult to go back and look at stuff of yourself, especially if you didn't smash it out the park. But I think that's even more reason to watch and say, okay, cool, where do I tighten this up? Because someone else is doing it. Someone else is paying attention to those details, and that person might be your competitor. And so you need to make sure that you're on top of it in terms of developing and strengthening your own self as a presenter and having the confidence to speak with authority, I think, and passion. It's either the one or the two. If you're not authoritative on a game but are passionate about it, you'll get there one day. But at least have some like sort of motivation. And I think for me, I was lucky because it was FIFA Interactive World Cup. It was a game I played anyway as a way to get into that space. So literally such a easy through pass for me to be able to move forward with that. And then getting exposed to everything else, then you start learning about clan-based games like CS. Then you start learning about, all the other games where, Valorant. And I guess back then, it was just a mix of stuff. And you then learn that, oh, actually, this FIFA that I play is like a 10% of a 90% monster. When you start getting exposed at Rage to other games that people love as passionately as you love the games that you love.
Why do you think why do you think that there is a situation where, because this is something I've experienced, and I don't know about you, but a lot
Yeah.
of brands and agencies enter the space, and
Yeah.
what they have is what they've seen overseas. So it's like,
Right.
cool, PewDiePie,
Right.
biggest YouTuber of all time for a very long time. Mr. Beast might not be gaming focused, but he has gaming. Look at all these views. Look at all these Twitch streamers. Look at these esports events. We're coming in. And then they're surprised when maybe the gaming creators are not getting hundreds of thousands of views. Their esports event is not pulling this massive crowd and streaming to hundreds of thousands of people. Why do you think it is that South Africa seems to not get those numbers? I mean, do you have an opinion on this as to what you think may be the issue?
I think we're not there yet. I think we're a different kind of market where people like to touch and feel things. And so, I think it's important to maybe first encourage people to come and be within these spaces, be it Rage, be it a Comic Con, be any of them, like be on the ground first. I always think it's important to kind of respect the people who've taken the time to come out their home, queue, get dressed, and come and see you guys. I think South Africa should be a boots on the ground market first, as opposed to focusing on the people on stream. I'm not saying they don't matter. They're important. It's something we should cultivate. But I think more and more, because of what we're asking of the sponsors and the people involved, get them the people they need to put their products in front of. And then we can have a bit of a trade exchange in terms of, okay, you've brought the people, here are the resources to grow the scene. I think that needs to be the case. I think on stream, you're speaking to a small minority who you're almost catering to over and above the people in front of you at an event. I think we're still very much a linear TV country. Believe it or not, there's still a lot of people who watch terrestrial TV. And so when you do stuff like streaming, I think it should be with the view to hold on to that footage, and then on another platform, instead of the 10, 11 viewers on stream, if you're going terrestrial, you could have 100,000 people watching at any given time. So we need to get our priorities straight in terms of the kind of market we are. You're saying that data costs a lot of money and it's a big data hurt. So why then make things on streaming when you have the opportunity to speak with broadcasters who are terrestrial, who are maybe not as sexy as some of the online YouTubes and such, but they have mass market. They have the numbers. You're never going to beat, unfortunately, the SABC for penetration. There's no way. The stream would have to be advertised for weeks, and people rarely wanting to see it. But there's a slam dunk. Don't price people out of this experience. Let's speak to a wider berth of people, because you never know how far away people who are considered in the lower LSM are from ascending. So if you have them on that journey from when they had nothing and said, listen, gaming doesn't mean you have to have a 25,000 rand rig. Come through, see people on console, see them playing on PC. Maybe you'll be inspired when you walk away to say, let me invest in myself. But I definitely think it's a more build it and they will come, but we need to get the people on the ground first. Streaming can come later. I really think that live show experience is good, because also it's a very immediate thing when you speak into a crowd and you see their reaction, as opposed to on stream. You don't have that connection, I don't think. So I think in our country, streaming, whilst important for the world, should be maybe top 4 or 5 priorities for us.
I love that you said that in a way that I've never actually been able to vocalize. And you did it in one sentence where you said we're a touch and feel culture. Like we like to get our hands dirty. And that's exactly what I think has sometimes been missing, maybe in my opinion, is those interactions and building the community from the ground up.
Yep.
Talking about those interactions, though, I mean, this is something that I said earlier, I don't really like the diversity conversation, because for me, the diversity conversation always ends up with someone asking me what it feels like to be a woman in gaming. And I don't know what it doesn't feel like to be a woman in gaming.
100%.
But I do, when I look back, I think, and right at the beginning, and I said this, where the faces that we were seeing were women, were people of color. And then it did go very white male. And I think if you look at like internationally, that was the thing where that was kind of where gaming went. Now, one of the conversations that comes up a lot is we need to diversify more. And I do agree we do. But I've also noticed that for me, the majority of gamers that I speak to, we're not meeting. We're not meeting those in South Africa. We seem to be missing those, the majority of gamers. We're not getting to them. Why do you think that is? Why are we lacking this opportunity? Is it because we don't have more diverse content creators and diverse audiences that are producing content? Or do you think it's just a matter of, someone said to me, it's the Starbucks mentality, where a lot of gamers are more interested in international than local? I mean, what is your
Right.
opinion on this?
I think, from a mass numbers perspective, I think, people who are into something at times also want to see a lot more of themselves in that scene. So yes, you may see me, doing the shows and whatnot, but I don't think there's enough people of color being part of the competitive teams, right? So it's cool. I can be there and say, show the diversity in the lineup of people, but I don't think there's enough diversity in the lineup of gamers. I think that the clans, like you said, it's a very white male dominated sport, and that's fine. That's their gift. They're talented at the game. Whether the organizations are doing enough to look for, good diversified players, I don't know if that's the case, right? Because obviously their first protocol is, I have the players to do the job. I might as well focus on these guys. Whereas maybe if you're a new organization, there's an opportunity to look at, being more integrative of other, players and cultures. So I think that's why you don't have a ton of black kids watching, because like I don't see myself on that stage. Whereas if you look at the FIFAs or the EAFCs, they see the Julios, they see the Tabos, they see the Zaids, So for them, it's like I see myself in those guys. And so I think maybe that's where we have a tricky business, because let's be honest, to get in on those teams and play at that level means you have to have a decent rig, means that you have to have, the support from an organization who've looked at you and said, listen, you're worth, cultivating your talent and you getting better. So these are all things that are already luxurious in a sense, right? These are luxuries that you have to be able to do this and defer certain tasks and things to other people. And I don't think a lot of other gamers have that opportunity. And obviously now, if you look at mobile, then you look at console, that's kind of where in South Africa you're going to get the bulk of your gamers. So I don't think we do enough things to make those people feel like, they can compete at a high level. And maybe they can't. Maybe, Run Pixie Run is never going to be a proper legit esports title. But being a nation where we can kind of take what we like and do what works for us, I think there's an opportunity to mix things up. I think if you have a country that loves mobile gaming a lot, why not lean into it? I sometimes feel at the shows that it's like, oh, yeah, you guys are cool, but the big boys are here. It's like, yes, big boys in terms of price and appeal, but mass, I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, it's console and mobile games. And I don't know if we're having an earnest enough competition to try to get those people to say, you can be good in those things. And maybe there's a trajectory for you to go up and land up at computer, where now you've honed your skills on the smaller skills, but your response times are getting better. Who knows? You find another title that leans into those skills, but you play it on a more powerful system with teammates now at larger competitions. But I don't think we've kind of drawn that line for anybody to say, start here and you could perhaps end here. And I think we have an opportunity to do so as a country that doesn't have to play by the global rules. I think we put ourselves under too much pressure sometimes doing that. And then we miss the picture of trying to cultivate our own scene.
I love that, because it's something I feel strongly about. Is there's a lot of conversation we have to, like, if brands are getting involved, we want to put money behind these games, and then we can give this one player an opportunity to go overseas. But I'm like,
100%.
instead of us building something uniquely South African, that one player gets that one trip once a year, that they're not going to be able to do anything with that. Whereas we could be using that money to like really cultivate a uniquely South African thing, because I think the majority of people would want that. So we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
Final question though, from the broadcast and the content creation space, because this is interesting to me. You obviously make a lot of content, so you've worked on broadcast, you understand the costs involved. Have you found in the past, because this is something I think a lot of people don't realize, is yes, maybe we don't reach as many people as a big international stream, and maybe it is a bit more niche, but it still costs the same to make a good thing. Because that is something that I've noticed a lot of brands kind of go, we want to get into gaming because internationally it's so big, but also it will be a cheap one for us. And then they're kind of surprised when you're like, well, actually it's a little bit more expensive, because not only do you need the videographer and the photographer and the whole broadcast team, but also you need a gaming specialist now. So that's going to change the price a little bit as well.
Right. Well, I think I think maybe what we've suffered from is throwing good money at the wrong things, the right money at the wrong things. I was saying this to someone, is, we have these budgets, but I don't think they're being utilized in the most ROI kind of promising way. I think sometimes we throw the money at it, and like you say, with these international comps, I think a lot of the time in the past, what was happened was overpromised and underdelivered, right? Like, you'd say, oh, look at this thing that's happening overseas and we can do this, catch that vibe. It's like, all right, sure. And then a big sponsor comes in with big money, throws it at it, and don't get the ROI. Then obviously what that means is that sponsor will be hesitant to play in that space. So I think you've had situations where a sponsor plays, gets burnt, goes away for a little bit, and then there's a tough job of trying to get them back on side to say, listen, yes, maybe then we were a bit, over ambitious, but this is the reality. And I think, to be fair, the scene has had to have an opportunity to self-correct and show its true colors, because then you can take that real data and then base future decisions on it, as opposed to kind of thumb sucking what was happening globally and thinking you can just kind of put it in here in South Africa and it would work. Like I say, I think there's some things that we can do that are the same as overseas, but I think there's definitely opportunities for us to do things that are uniquely South African. And so I don't see what we stand to lose from that. I think that if we focus on our market first, make it attractive, because we've got everybody who's playing something feeling like they matter, then I think it makes it an easier sell for marketers. I don't think it's a tough time selling it now, but I think if we ever want to get to the spectacles of stadiums and whatnot, there's a more organic growth path that needs to be taken, instead of putting ourselves under this immense pressure to hit high targets when we don't even have the foundation really. It's there, but it's not been, pulled in and made sure that ring fenced all the people who love this thing. I think there's still very much a lot of clicks within the sector. And so I think there needs to be a coming together. And who drives that has got a big job on their hands, because I think also some people sometimes feel like we're all fighting over the same piece of the pie, especially from trying to get sponsorship and whatnot. But I think if we're all concerted in making it something where we all participate, then different sponsors have a role to play, because you don't only have to have certain ones involved. If you're dealing with lower LSMs, brands from those LSMs can come in, start operating, because then now there's space to speak to people who live maybe in the township, but are part of that network where a certain cell provider allows them to get their data cheaper. Those things need to be kind of pushed. And so saying that, listen, where you think there might be an impediment to you is becoming a better gaming or being better inculcated into the culture, we as a scene are going to try to find ways to kind of lessen those hurt points. And I don't think that's there. I think sometimes it's a bit every man for himself. And when you work or deal with an organization, then your chances of success are easier. Everyone else, though, still needs to figure it out. So I think if there's a way to guide people through a path of saying, this is what you're passionate about, this is how you cultivate it, and who knows what might come of it, I think then that'll foster a spirit of saying that everyone's equal under the gaming sun in SA, which I don't feel is the case just yet.
Kamza, thank you so much for your insights. I could have gone on. I'm trying to keep these short. I feel like there's a follow-up that needs to happen. If you're watching this, hit Kamza up. I know he's got some great ideas. These are conversations we've had. I think he can help you and figure out how to navigate the space. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can chat soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And yeah, let's see where this goes. Hopefully those with the power are listening and can help people like you and I effect that change. Let's see.
As part of my special series of Tech Girl Talks focusing on the business of esports and gaming in South Africa, I thought it was imperative to chat to someone who, if you are in esports, specifically in our region, you know him very well, but he's a familiar face to a lot of people who have looked into getting into the gaming space. Nick Holden, one of the founders of ACGL, probably one of the biggest tournament operators in South Africa. I mean, is that the best way to describe ACGL? I feel like over time you've developed into a lot more than that, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, from our side of things, and first off, Sam, thank you so much for having me on the show. Over the years, yeah, we've developed just from essentially our first point of call was to structure esports in South Africa. That's given us a little bit of a wider skill set as we find ourselves saying a yes to a lot of things all the time, meaning that we've learned a lot along the way. So from a digital marketing standpoint, eventing operations, even from a retail standpoint for B2B sales, we found ourselves expanding our operations quite considerably, but I think all of these things tie into ultimately what we're trying to do in terms of our main goal in South Africa and sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. So yeah, we've evolved over the years to where we are now.
And you have this online platform that ultimately allows gamers from around the country to set up a profile, log in, and play with other South African gamers. Am I right? Is that the simplified version of the ACGL platform?
It is the simplified side of things, but ultimately also the rest of Africa is really one of our point of calls. We do want to be able to encourage players, not just in South Africa, but outside of it as well.
What's been the pickup of this though? Because a lot of the conversations I've had, the constant thing is, oh, there's not enough data and, you know, people don't know how to find each other online. And, you know, it's difficult for South African gamers to connect. But I know, because I've been on your site, you have a very large community of, I don't want to call them casual gamers because they're playing and they're competing at night, but they are ultimately, they're not the top level pros, though you have those on the site as well. It's the everyday African player who's like, hell, I want to jam this game and I want to see how good I am against other people.
Ultimately, yeah, I think from our side of things, as much as we try to gear towards the top end of esports, we need to make this a space that is as welcoming as possible to a wider community, because we do know that gamers as a overall, not all of them are in the esports bracket. There is a small percentage that side, but that's why even from the platform side, we actually try to take care of how do we engage users? How do we give them opportunities to win stuff just by participating and playing and finding some matches? So the casual audience does make up a big part of that segment. It always needs to be geared of aspirational in the same way that if you're playing a five-a-side match or tennis or table tennis, you want the opportunity to be able to play up against players of a high level, but you also don't want to just constantly be knocked down time and time again. We've had to reevaluate over the years in terms of how we can make this an easier space for the casual gamer, because ultimately we need both sides of that coin in order for us to be able to provide the digital marketing space that brands actually find valuable.
So how many tournaments are you running on? And when I say tournaments, just to find that to someone who's watching and doesn't know a lot about the space, these are competitions each evening. We're not doing huge big LAN events at Comic-Con. You do those as well, but these competitions that anyone can enter, how many of those are you running on say a weekly basis?
On a weekly basis, wow, I think we're probably at 20 to 25 a week, which is ridiculous. I mean, you might have seen my eyes going to the right-hand side there, just looking up some stats. I think we're on at around about 5,307 tournaments run. I think in May, actually alone, we've had 100 tournaments, April 135, and March 144. So that's really important once again, because I think in our push to just not only promote professional gamers, we want semi-professional to be able to have a space to play, and that comes with regular cash incentive prize pools at the end of the day. People want to be able to develop that base, and that's where the online tournaments became vitally important, but also as a ground to be able to just get more people on the platform ultimately altogether.
Are all those competitions sponsored? I mean, do you have a brand on every one of those, or is a lot of it just community driven as well?
So no, not all of them are sponsored. Some of them are technically, but I'd say a majority of them currently at the moment are coming out of pocket of ACGL directly. It's something that we consider a direct marketing fee. Now, that does cross-pollinate with things that we have in terms of display adverts on the site and providing that value to our users. So it is coming out of our pocket for, I wouldn't say a large majority, but if you take a look at the more regular tournaments, that is from ACGL direct.
Do you have to have a prize incentive? Because this is, I was talking to someone else about this and the idea of building community. There was a time where, and even now, I'll have a lot of people come to me, and I'm sure they come to you and they go, well, where can I find other people to play with or play against? Do you find now that over time, because we've seen such an influx of money into the space, that players are more inclined to be like, well, where can I make money playing this versus I just want to find a cool group of people I can jam and compete with?
Yeah, it's a cruel situation of community growth versus player interests and time compensation. So what I mean by that is when it comes down to these players, the standard definitely has increased in terms of what players expect. They're expecting free to enter tournaments and being able to try at least play for some kind of cash prize pool at the end of the day. We've seen that that is actually an upliftment as an overhaul, but sometimes, I mean, from people that have been around for the scene for quite some time, we used to compete for anything. I mean, it could be literally a digital reward, it could be a photo, a certificate. So I don't think that that has changed between some of the smaller communities, but as an overall, I think when people are participating in these bigger tournaments, they do want to be able to have a cash prize pool, because if we turn that off, we do notice that there's a direct decrease. So that incentive structure is definitely key to the user experience, and also the aspirational side of the gaming platform, or just competitive gamers as a whole.
From a South African gaming perspective, we are such a big country, right? And we're so spread apart. And again, like I mentioned, I'll meet someone at, say, a Comic-Con where they'll say, oh, well, I live in East London and I don't know anyone else around me that plays games. Do you think that maybe that is one of the difficulties of our country specifically, is that there is so much distance that it's not a situation where everyone is an hour away from each other and they can all get to the same place to play?
Yeah, I think distance as well as just communication boundaries and also cultural. There's a couple of things there that have essentially hampered our growth from a South African perspective, is that localization of play is vitally important. And that's what we've seen internationally as a key factor in order for us to get onto the international scene, to get to that level, is that they've had localization of play, regular opportunities for their players and their communities to be able to compete up against one another. But the price point there is quite significant and a sticking point for a lot of South Africans across the board, which is also a barrier to entry ultimately. But even from a communication standpoint, I mean, we take a look at South Africa as a whole, I still think that we're still speaking pretty much down one group of individuals that actually have this opportunity to be able to play on a regular basis. And that means that you're looking at an average income or a higher LSM bracket overall, where we do need to be able to try almost democratize gaming to a certain extent and being able to bring that in. So there's a couple of things that we're hoping to be able to see from the future, but also trying to gear ourselves up for. So should that happen, that we become a welcoming space, but also a fun and engaging space for the users at the end of the day.
When we talk about an esports tournament, obviously the first thing I think a lot of brands and agencies and people imagine is what they see overseas. Massive stadium, all these people, flashing lights, crazy numbers on stream. And then when we move to South Africa, it can be disappointing. And let's not be candid about it. We've seen in the past the big monies come in and it hasn't. The stream numbers are not there. The crowds are not being pulled. They're not coming to the arena. Why do you think that is? Why is it that the competitive esports landscape for South Africa struggles to potentially pull an audience? Do you have any insight on this? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's wider general access in terms of people being able to, one, know about it from a media and attention standpoint, but I think that the biggest problem that we've tried to do in South Africa is that we've tried to ramp stuff up in terms of these massive events of massive scale in terms of prize pools without actually having the development there before there to be able to actually make it attainable. I mean, you can't go 200 miles an hour if your engine's too small to be able to get you there at the end of the day. So our job and our responsibility at the moment is to warrant our increase in terms of the performance of what we can actually offer before these values of these prize pools actually can be substantiated. Now, that can be disheartening to players specifically because they're going, we just want to be able to be in the spotlight. We want these big opportunities. We want this opportunity to be able to play. But what ends up happening is that when these big events, as you mentioned, there's no spectators there. There's no story. There's no narrative. But that narrative didn't just happen because of prize pools overseas. That happened because people were putting in work regularly and being able to play up against one another in a localized or just even an online environment, being able to build these communities. So when they go to these events, they've got 50 people behind them or 100 people behind them. And if you take a look at in terms of consideration of that for 32 teams, for example, with 100 players or 100 spectators behind them, that's value in terms of an audience. We have a long way to be able to still try grow. And I think what everyone is getting caught up on is this idea of this prestige in terms of esports. But what you really should be cultivating is, we're a fun group of people and you want to be able to hang around us in terms of these spaces, in terms of esports teams locally. So I think when it comes down to all the big investments into esports in South Africa, is that we've had this expectation that when the big money comes in, there's just going to be this amazing audience that just appears out of nowhere and is suddenly interested. And I think that's a mistake in a big way, because what we still need to be able to get to, and I mentioned this previously, is that getting from A to Z means that we need to be able to get to those other letters in between, meaning that we need to be able to get those structures, the community growth, even the teams that are going to be participating in these big events. It's up to them also to be able to build those audiences to provide more value. The more value they provide, the bigger the scene essentially benefits overall. And I think the big thing in terms of what I'd like to think our kind of different action is that we don't want to overpromise to the players on opportunities of prize pool. We want to provide a regular way to be able to keep playing. And then we want to be able to scale that up when the opportunity does arise, or if the community does give something back or showcase the amount of noise that they can make. That gives us ammo to be able to go to various companies with and say, hey, this community is active, they're loud, they will shout at the top of their lungs about this campaign. And that's how you get your ROI. That's how you actually be able to market your brands a little bit better. And I think that that's the way that we need to go a little bit more. I don't think it's completely pulled in negative in terms of us seeing these big prize pools, because I think it has provided people with an opportunity to go into the spotlight. Even when it comes down to the commentators or the MCs that might get involved, is that they've now got work. They've got a huge opportunity to be in that spotlight for that event. And I think that that's also vitally important. So I don't think it's a complete negative in terms of these big events, but I do worry about that level of investment or commitment to esports and how that can burn brands in the long term.
So now we're basically going to give someone some free advice on how to spend their money. But I think it's also a really relevant way to showcase this. If you had to look back and you look at the tournaments that your company has done and the events that you've run, which would you say is one of the standout example that you like to use as a showcase, and why do you think it was a success?
One campaign that I actually really like was our ACGL grind campaign. Now, for us, that started as kind of a conceptual idea of how do we give a couple of titles that we believe deserve an opportunity to be able to play for a bigger prize pool overall. How do we give them a spotlight in terms of regular broadcasts that aren't going to burn our pockets? Ultimately, is that we can do it online. It reduces the costs. But then how do we get these communities to also fight between themselves for the stake in terms of prize pool or for an opportunity to be able to be heard? So what we essentially did is we took 3 titles and we basically gave them each a hashtag. So for example, CODZA became CODZA Grind, Rocket League Grind. And we basically said to them, whoever gets the highest reach from their hashtags, they will get a little bit of an increase in terms of their total guaranteed prize pool. So the communities, for the first time that I've kind of seen it from my side, is started interacting with one another. They started engaging with one another. The banter was fantastic across the board, and it was all in the effort to be able to support their title for these campaigns. And I think from that side of things, a lot of success in not just being transparent with our players, but also being transparent with the brands of saying, we'll set these goals that you want to be able to reach as metrics, but we'll give that to the community to try achieve as an added benefit on their side. What we did as well as a little bit further from that is that we gave each community their own goals of if you pass a certain amount of impressions or retweets or views on a post or participants, you also get a little bit of a bonus on that side. So we micro-incentivize the community, we macro-incentivize them as 3 different titles, but there was the real tough one is that if you didn't get the highest reach as a community, you actually get knocked out for the next season. And anybody that was just playing on the platform could enter their embers in, and whoever got the highest as far as a community putting that total in would get through to the next season as a part of the grind. So it's once again looking at the ecosystem build of that. How do we gamify elements that the community already, we know that they're there. They want to be able to make noise. They want to put their teams in the spotlight. And I think so far that campaign has really shown a lot of success in building awareness about not only the campaign, but also about the titles and the communities and the community leaders too.
I love that. I actually saw that campaign. I remember the banter online. So that for me was very exciting because obviously the gamers, we're a little bit trolly. We like to be a bit cheeky, and you got to see that in real time, but all for, like you said, the growth of your individual communities. Now, this is always a tough one, but I don't like to pinpoint actual mistakes. So we're not going to do that. But what I am going to ask you is, what do you think? You've been around long enough. You've obviously been running these. What do you think is maybe the one thing that brands, agencies, operators getting into the space, that one mistake that they tend to make often and you see repeated time and time again?
Wow. So one of the things I guess that I do see quite a bit is just not abiding to terms and conditions that are outlined from a more general purpose perspective as the game owners themselves. I mean, EA, FC, Call of Duty, Overwatch, whatever it might be, they've got guidelines for their operators. Some of them from that side of things say that you need to be able to submit documents. They don't police it as well as they could because, I mean, they've got the world to be able to take care of. But the thing that I see is the operators kind of just go in haphazardly. They connect brands that shouldn't be involved in the spaces. And what that does actually is negatively impacts our scene as an overall, because I think as soon as operators see that externally, especially when it comes down to South Africa, because I've seen this happen quite a bit, is that they end up almost punishing us because of that. It breeds a negative sentiment towards this region and what are these people doing here? They don't abide to the rules. They're just doing their own thing. So from my side of things, I see that quite often. And it's not for me to be able to police on my side of things. And I don't want to be that arbiter in terms of what we're doing, but it's something I see quite regularly. I'd say that is probably one of the biggest sticking points for operators, just not abiding to conditions that have been set out there and are publicly known or should be publicly known.
That is something that a lot of agencies don't realize when they're coming into this space, is that the games might be there, but they're owned by someone else. So this is not just free real estate for you to throw your brand on. Like, there are partnerships globally that exist. Those brands have certain regulations in place for whether you hold a tournament or not. And you're 100% correct. In South Africa, it's a bit of the Wild West. I see it all the time, and I worry because I have seen it a few times where I thought, if this publisher turns just one eye towards our region, they will shut that down, and the long-term effects of that will be really negative for the space as a whole. People don't quite understand that. In terms of the competitive landscape, though, so this is something that comes up a lot, and South Africa has always been a bit of a difficult space, but I know you've now entered it, so I'd love to hear your thoughts specifically on high school and university esports, because for a long time, that's been something that's been spoken about globally as a way to build gaming, but locally there is appeared from the outside to be a lot of barriers to entry.
Yeah, so I think high schools and actually just school esports as a whole is a very, very exciting space, which was pushed forward actually thanks to COVID, because everybody was at home playing and they saw that this was a social engaging opportunity for people to be able to be connected online. And once people started watching more online, they saw, okay, these people have opportunities and tournaments, and it dropped a lot of the stigma that was associated inside of the schooling space and increased the demand of the students themselves inside of the schools. So we've entered the space essentially as ACGL Schools League, so ASL as an overall. And from our side of things, we've seen significant growth. I keep on bringing up the numbers, but last year I think we were on around about 20 schools, and now we're at 160 signed up to the platform. So there's some massive growth there. But the most important thing that we want to be able to kind of preach about this space is the low barriers of entry. Free to enter in terms of the market, I think, needs to be key, because these teachers and coaches, they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of esports, right? So we want to be able to help them in that journey and not make this intimidating. So hand-holding also becomes very important to be able to show not only the benefits of esports, some of the concerns, but also how you can structure this inside of your environment and actually determine who your best players are, because that's what they want. Because as that bridges further, this high school demand is going to translate into universities, and universities are already providing opportunities with bursaries for students to be able to get into their spaces. And that's the ecosystem build that we need. And we need to look at that as a 5 to 10 year outline, because that's also what changes ultimately our scene as an overall. We talk about localization of play. when you're in school, what was the thing that we did? It's like you would go to a school and you would play your fixtures, and then you would go the next week and whatever sport you did, that was a part of the code, and that needs to be a part of the code in terms of esports too. So I'm highly excited about the schooling space. I think it's almost a diamond in the rough, but I obviously have concerns about the space too, because I think without people knowing exactly the ins and outs of esports, it can also be manipulated to a certain degree. And I think the intention there is also vitally key, is that this is for the players, this is for the teachers, this is for the coaches. They need to have a structured, rule-defined environment in order to be able to play, and it can't just be a free-fall. It needs to be a structured environment. Otherwise, they might as well be gaming at home.
And am I correct in saying, so for you, you've got the platform. It is an online process for a lot of these schools. They can sign up, they can play online against other schools. And it isn't, I'm going to be very careful about how I do this. So if you're watching, you probably aren't 100% clued up on the esports space in South Africa, but there are some players in the space who believe that certain things need to be kept or believe they can gatekeep. So I have to be very careful about how I word this. But there is a freedom here because you are allowing anyone to compete in a schools league, but it isn't stepping on any national toes or national sports league feet. Am I correct in saying that? You know what I'm trying to do here, and if you're in the space, you'll understand. But I'm basically saying no school is going to be in trouble for just creating another space for their players to compete, right?
No. Schools are approaching it differently. Some are going down the extramural path. Some are defining it as a sports code inside of their spaces. And that's not, once again, for us to be able to dictate. We ultimately are not going to be stepping on the toes of others. But to be honest, I'm not worried about that. I don't know if I'm not allowed to swear on this, but I want to go down the lines of I don't care. We need to do this. It needs to happen. It needs to go ahead for our players. Because we have, take a look at RLCS, right? They've just announced that anybody can qualify for their $250,000 majors that take place basically, the next one's about to take place quite soon. And you've got a qualification spot locally. Anybody above the age of 13 can participate in that. Now, great. The new player might participate in that, and if they get knocked out, then what? That's what we need to consider, is going into the school environment, building that competition, building that integration of competitive play. We need to provide those opportunities for our players. Otherwise, they're just going to keep on getting decimated every single time that they go overseas. So, no, I don't care about the national side of it. For right now, if anything, I worry about bureaucracy in esports. I think it is a big sticking point that agenda can be swallowed by key individuals that ultimately can destabilize the balance and structures. But I do understand it as a need from parents and teachers and students that want to be able to wear their colors, for example, and they want to be represented on a national level. And I hear that and I feel that sentiment. And believe me, I've also tried to be able to help out in that regard. But I think ultimately our goal is we need to do this for the players. We need to structure it for them, and we need to be able to provide those opportunities. So that's where our head is at. Naturally, as a business operator, that's not all philanthropic from that side of things. We do have a business mind on us. But it's also how can we help these schools? So yeah, there's both sides of that coin.
So Nick can't say it, but I will say it. There is absolutely nothing stopping you from signing up and playing with different high schools, different schools, competing. If you want to go down the route of national colors, there is a different path you can go, but it is somewhat different. What we're saying is there is no gatekeeping in esports. No one's getting in trouble. If you're a brand or agency wanting to get behind this, you will not legally be in trouble. This is something that is ultimately going to help grow the competitive community. And I think what's important here is the word community, is that this is the place to start, because it doesn't always have to be the massive stage with the big lights. Getting into schools is something that can grow that. Have you seen a better uptake from parents? Because that's my big thing. Parents and teachers who in the past would have gone, this is bad. And a lot of brands as well going, oh, I don't want to encourage someone sitting in front of a screen for 17 hours or however long it is they're going to do that. Have you seen that attitude change in the last few years? Absolutely.
And parents are encouraging it. We've seen some amazing stories of both from, there's kids that are standing out in terms of leadership, in terms of their roles and saying, hey, we want this to be a welcoming space and getting people involved. But to kids that didn't have social activities that they could participate in terms of other sports as well. So, and getting to be with a community and be with a group and being able to play, which is so, so special. We've seen that story time and time again. And it's something that I think the parents are actually pushing for more. They've seen it firsthand. They're seeing how much fun their kids are actually having if they end up just winning a single match of Rocket League or Battle Royale that they might be playing. They run up to their parents. And I think as long as we've seen that and define it as we can have parents and we need to have parents involved in terms of this process, because the analogy I like to also point to is like, you wouldn't just let your kid necessarily run around a mall between a whole bunch of strangers. And that's where parents, in terms of their structured play, have a big responsibility, is figure out what they're up to, get involved. And I know kids aren't sometimes always the best to be able to communicate with in terms of when their next fixture is, when are they streaming, but that's also something that we're looking to actively solve from that side of things. So parents' attitudes have changed, and to those attitudes of parents that might not have changed yet, I think if they're sitting on the fence, their attitude will change over the next couple of years, because they'll see how special and how important these events can be for their students and learners. But not only that, also the opportunities for their kids to learn further agency themselves, because the coaches can't depict everything, the teachers can't depict everything, so they have to make the strategies, they have to make the calls and the outlines, which is not something that you actually get in traditional sports.
Let's get back to the business side of it, because obviously ACGL, this is you're this online tournament operator. Like you said, you're doing a lot of other things, real life activations. You understand all of these intrinsic moving parts. So I am now a brand or an agency, and I've decided, right, this is a good space for me to play, and I want to start running tournaments. What are the expectations I should have? Because I know in my experience, and again, I've never had to sell these, but I've always worked on the other side, is that a lot of brands think this is going to cost them very little money. They're going to have this tournament. They're going to give away a packet of crisps, and hundreds of thousands of people are going to now be entering their event, getting super excited. So what are the expectations you should have if you're coming into this going, okay, I'd like to run a tournament, whether it be the massive one with the big stage or just a small online event to kind of gauge the waters?
Yeah, so I think defining kind of your goals before you start getting into esports is vitally important. If you're there to sell 1 million crisps, as you might mention, from your side of things, that might not be the best way to be able to start things off with. It's about brand awareness, engaging with that community. Becomes the first step for any brand being able to get into the gaming space, but also being able to understand what is that narrative that you're trying to push, because every brand has an idea around them, and I think that's where marketing consultants but also gaming consultants become vitally important. So for us, we speak to very much a core competitive community, but there's also casual audiences, and there's ways that we can bridge that to either or. So defining your goals becomes vitally important, and working together to try build that. Yes, we've got tournaments and outlines, but you need to make sure that that matches to what kind of group. I mean, if you're selling makeup, then that might not necessarily be your EAFC male-dominated tournament, but maybe it's a female segment that you could do with that, as well as try to get some influencers and build a campaign around that. So there's ways and spaces that you can get involved. It's going to be different for a whole bunch of different brands, but I think the goals that are defined by the brand ultimately should depict. There shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for brands in terms of esports, because then what are you? Are you just, you don't have an identity, you're just there to be there? So I think from that side of things, it becomes vitally important that anybody that is working inside of the gaming space, define your goals, figure out with your gaming consultant or with the partners that you're speaking to, how can you plug into the space? There's been some amazing campaigns in terms of what brands have done, but there's also been some horrible ones where it just doesn't make sense. It's just like they've tried to attach to gaming, but you can see they missed out on the core cultural elements that become so significant for any gamer to go, you're talking nonsense. You're not here to talk to me. You're just here to sell to me. And I think there's nothing more powerful for a gamer to see than when a brand gets it wrong, because they'll immediately go, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know how to be able to get involved. So the culture of gaming also becomes vitally important.
Do you think that the South African esports community and the gaming community is a little bit apprehensive around brands entering the space, purely just because over the years we've seen a lot of brands come in and say that they're in and kind of make quite a big splash and then very quickly withdraw? Do you think that they're a little bit more apprehensive about getting behind brands? Because I do feel like a lot of the marketing around gaming and esports is, it's a very loyal group. Whereas I would argue they are loyal, but it goes both ways. There's a bit of trust that has to exist at the start.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question in terms of does the community itself become apprehensive to brands? But I think they only become apprehensive to brands if it is an abrasive concept in terms of what those brands are doing. And what I mean by that is that these gamers ultimately support the thing that they do. They love doing these things inside of their own community. So when it comes down to brands that either are supporting that journey or that path or that way, then that makes a lot more sense. And I don't necessarily think it's about the community not becoming a part of that brand or following that brand or engaging with that brand. I think it's much more about, does it support them? And if it supports them, they'll buy into it. If it's a part of their outline, they'll buy into it. So it's not necessarily a community thing. I think it's with all of us, with brands across the board, not even in gaming, is that you will start to get involved with brands that tap into the cultural things that you might be liking and the things that you enjoy. And ultimately, I think that's gamers don't have an approach of, no, we're not going to talk to any brand that just gets involved with esports. It's like, no, if anything, if it's pushed to be able to support us and showcase what we're doing and celebrate what we're doing, then I think they'll be easier to be able to buy into it, because then it's not hey, we're just sponsoring this for 100,000 Rand and this is our brand, insert here, you must now love us. Which I think is not something that we would ever advise a brand to do.
Nick, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I'm so excited about what you're doing in the schools space. I'm excited about the platform as a whole. And I hope if anyone here is interested in getting involved in competitive gaming, looking at a way to enter the space, that they'll come and chat to you. Thank you for your time. Welcome to another episode of the Business of Gaming and Esports, the special series that I'm doing for Tech Girl Talks. And I have a very special guest all the way from America joining me. She's on a break from studying. Thea is with us. And now I'm going to jump straight into this, Thea, because I found out about you a couple of years ago. I had been traveling overseas, commentating, casting esports events, and you popped up, and it was actually someone overseas who said, I found another South African who's also doing some stuff overseas, and it was you. And I got really excited because it's always exciting when I see another South African woman kicking ass. But I also got excited because you didn't waste your time with South Africa. You kind of went international almost immediately. That was your focus. Was that always the goal? Did you always just have the global dream, or did you start locally? Because I feel terrible. I didn't see you in South Africa per se. It was only when I started seeing you on international events.
Yeah, that's not your fault. Weirdly enough, I had this conversation with a lot of other international South Africans, but we never really made contact with the South African community. It was like I didn't even know it existed, and maybe that's my bad. I should have gone to more events and stuff. But yeah, the first people to pick me up and wanting to work with me happened to be international companies, and that's sort of how we just kind of isolated ourselves. And afterwards we were like, whoa, there's an entire South African community here. And I was like, well, there needs to be more things in place to connect us all. And that's why I'm like going back now, trying to help other South Africans meet up with the right people, right brands, etc.
I think it's fantastic that you started overseas. I started local and then realized that it just wasn't working for me and did the jump. But I think what's important is when you start overseas, you can kind of see what it's supposed to look like if you're a gaming or esports creator, and you are seeing a matured market. You've obviously now come back to South Africa and have started doing some work here, and we'll get into what you've done with the organization you've bought into. But first off, I want to talk from a creator point of view. When you came back, did you notice the difference? Do you think it is a maturity thing maybe in the industry locally?
Ooh, so are we talking financially or people? Like, which aspect?
I think it's a bit of. I mean, why don't we touch on both? We can start with the people first and move into the financial, because I think they're both quite interesting topics.
For sure. Well, the people. Well, let's just say I feel like a lot of South African communities are so isolated because they don't make international connections. You can get away with some awful drama on Twitter Spaces and things, and internationally you'd be cancelled and no brand would ever want to work with you. But here there's sometimes a lot of drama, a lot of like name calling, and I just stayed away from that. I never knew that existed. But it's rather funny looking back at it and seeing that sort of the norm here. Maybe I'm just imagining it. I don't know. It feels like we need an adult in the room when these conversations are happening, or else there's just a lot of name calling and things like that happening. But also a lot of nice people too. And I think they just never branched out to that professional space in the international sphere. But with regards to finances, yeah, when I come back here and I'm like, hey guys, your time's actually worth X, Y, and Z. You should never work for a company without reimbursement. Exposure isn't paying the bills. They're almost like too polite to ask for a compensation. And I think we had this discussion the other day regarding other events where this is happening. And in the international space, I learned very quickly exactly what my worth is per hour, per view, very clear cut, there's no sugarcoating it. So when I was invited to speak at the Nixa podcast, we had the same sponsor, which is very funny. And I won't talk about the sponsor in particular, but I worked with them in the past and got X figure as a one-person show, and they as an entire org got Y as a figure, which was less than mine as one person. But that's because I knew what I was worth and I asked it. So after that, I was like, guys, no. People are taking advantage of South Africans. Let's show them what the standard is in the industry. Let's make sure South African streamers know what they're worth. And let's make sure we can get those connections set up for them.
It's so interesting you say that, because obviously when I started out, I was doing esports in South Africa. I would work for just tickets to events. I was super excited just to be there. And then I got paid, but I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was enough to maybe cover my petrol to and from the events. And then I started working overseas, and in the beginning was in for this huge surprise, because I suddenly went, wow, like this is now something I can actually do for a living. And I can do it as a living now because I get to work as much as I do outside of South Africa. But what I found interesting was coming back and saying, hey, actually, this is now what I charge. And the immediate sort of step back of agencies and brands going, well, never, how can you charge that? Are you insane? And I'd be like, well, this is what I'm getting in the rest of the world. And I always wonder, because like you said, you obviously started international. So there is that I suppose the mystique about, oh, well, she's only worked overseas. For me, it was very much, but we knew you 3 years ago, and that was what you were charging. That's what we want. And that was always an interesting conversation for me. And it still is, where I say, well, I've obviously developed and grown, and it ties back a little bit to what you were saying about the people in the scene as well. I wonder if they're still kind of stuck in one place, and we haven't been able to see how things need to move. We can talk a lot, though, about the financial implications of marketing agencies and how they play. What I actually want to focus on is Nixa, because this is an esports organization, ultimately an organization that's managing and sort of owns, for want of a better term, a bunch of different teams. So say, for example, a Counter-Strike team, they've got a FIFA player, a Fortnite player. They do this podcast with you. And then all of a sudden, there's this big announcement that you're buying into this business. I mean, walk us through that whole process and why you decided to make that move.
Yeah, so this comes back to the fact that I've never been approached by a South African org. Nobody has ever bothered to reach out to me. Most of my friends who've made it into the international space have been in these positions. And it sort of baffles my mind how there's this isolated group of people who get like all the sponsorship deals and stuff. And if an org did come to me, I would have said no back in the day, because I also viewed them as predatory. I don't, in my mind, they don't really offer you something per se. That's what I thought. They just kind of take a portion of all your sponsorships you would get. So when I spoke to Nixa, that was my first contact with a South African org ever. And I figured out these two guys, Dale and Jason, were actually really nice people. And I could see they were actually paying their content creators like salaries. They were paying the teams. They were making a loss at first because they were so set on making sure that people were getting paid. So I quickly figured out, oh, these are nice people. Their goal is actually to help South Africans, and I like that. And they wanted to take me on as a content creator when they saw we had the same views. And I was like, guys, I appreciate it, but I don't really want to work for an org per se here. I think I can help you for free. I can offer you way more just in advice. And I used the sponsorships as an example, like how they were taking advantage of orgs even in South Africa. And then they come back the next day, they're like, okay, how about you just co-own like a third of Nixa and we take it from there together? And I was like, guys, you know what? I think, and now you're talking, I think we can do this. I've always wanted to come back to South Africa to help. Like my saying is, you can't help somebody out of a drowning or a sinking ship without getting in first and then helping them up. Like you can't, you have to get in with them. So for me, getting back into South Africa is important. Like my goal is never to leave the country. I'll always be South African. I visit every 3 to 4 months. But I needed people who are already embedded in South Africa, and Nixa already had that. So they can help me from the ground up, and then I can help them with international contacts, which is what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I think we're on the same page, and yeah, I think we can set an industry standard going forward.
It's interesting because there was a time on the global stage where you saw a lot of esports organizations signing content creators. And at the time, it made sense to me because those esports organizations and brands were brands within themselves. They were highly successful businesses. The content creators were highly successful in their own right. When they came together, it was like a merging of two different markets in a really great way to kind of share those resources, get more eyeballs on everyone's content, and it made sense. And then I saw all the South African organizations do the exact same thing, and I questioned, much like you. I went, why this doesn't work? It's a different landscape, right? There's no real benefit here if you're a content creator. Like it didn't make sense. How is it going to change with Nixa? Because I'm presuming now you're coming in going, okay, actually, I didn't want to sign with an org, but I can see how to make this work. What is your vision in terms of content creation and Nixa coming together?
Yeah, so I think mainly the big thing here is it's not just this organization entity trying to scoop up people, which is always like predatory vibes, right? So I already have a lot of friends in South Africa and in the international space, and instead, I can approach them personally and be like, hey, so I'm actually part of Nixa now. If you'd like, I can put you on the team and I can do A, B, and C for you. You don't have to sign away your rights, anything like that. I can't make promises. I come from it more like an agency here, where I'm like, look, I'm going to give everything in my power to connect you with cool brands. And if something stumbles upon my way, I will try and represent you if you'd like me to do that. And you can also say no to any offer I give you. It's really important to me to break all that stereotypes, like you're not signing away your rights. I don't like monthly salaries, although we currently have some of them set up with people who have been here from the beginning. Because it's almost like, I don't know, like a slave contract. It's like I give you 5,000 Rand a month, and then I get a cool sponsorship from this brand, and they give me 20,000 Rand to use your image. Just like that, I made a profit, but you get 8,000. Like, no, how about I negotiate with the brand and I'm like, hey, they're willing to do 20,000. If we take like a small percentage of that and we give you the bulk of the money, would you be willing to do this thing for us? Instead of just making sure you show up to events, you do all the work for us, you're our image. Like, I want these creators to feel like I can connect them. They can come to me. We can sort of create an actual team. And not in the cringy sense of saying we're a family, like genuinely. So all these creators are coming on board, and we haven't announced half of them, and each of them are contributing already. And it's kind of crazy what we're able to do for each other, just like friends would, not necessarily in an esports sense. And then Dale and Jason, they have the esports teams. They're making sure we have some of the best teams. That's also important. I'm coming more from the influencer perspective, making sure people have the tools they need to just do whatever they want to do, really.
So I love that there's those two different things. So Nixa still retains that esports core of competitive teams, but bringing in the influencer creator space. This is such an interesting road for us to go down, because as someone who's kind of playing in that space, and I'm actually choosing to like move away from, I kind of want to work with maybe 1 or 2 brands locally and stay out of doing the typical gaming campaigns that you see in South Africa, which are very much this cut and paste concepts across as many influencers as we can get. And like you mentioned, the same group of influencers time and time again. It was something that I wanted to move away from. But what you were talking about there, you brought up something, and it's such a small thing, but it kind of ties into what I wanted to talk to you about, where you mentioned like, we'll use your image. this is a headache. I'm very lucky. I'm represented by an agency in the UK that works with some really big content creators. So they have a lawyer on staff. They're actually owned by a law firm, and they'll go through a contract and say, hold on, this says that you're giving your something as simple as this is that they've got usage rights to your image forever. We can't do that. We're signing away your face. And yes, we all know that this brand isn't going to suddenly print my face and put it on billboards, but you're still giving them the right to do that. That was a little thing like an image usage thing or a restraints of trade or anything like that. And I've found when my agent pushes back and goes, hold on, we need to change the contract, there's quite a scared response from a lot of South African companies. They freak out. They don't want to discuss it anymore. They get quite upset. Do you think that there is a lack of education with some of the local brands, specifically when working with gaming creators, about the business side of how this works, and maybe something that you've experienced overseas, it's just so different when you come back home?
Yeah, there's a very clear distinction between the past generation and the new one. Like, I don't really know how they thought they could go about this, but they really do think they can just kind of use creators, and creators are just like small kids who are like just happy to be on camera. They don't need any money, it's fine. Which is kind of bizarre. And when you ask them what you're really worth, sometimes there is a shock, and sometimes I get ghosted, because they don't understand what your time is worth. Because we're not asking for exaggerated fees here. Like, I don't think I'm the bee's feet or whatever the saying is. My time, I have to decide today, am I going to work for company A or B? Company A is international and is offering me X. So if I want to help my South African company, obviously they have to match that, or else, but they aren't even willing to offer a tenth of that. They thought they can just get it for free, which is odd. But then you have situations, and I'm not going to name call here, where you have events or companies, and they're more than happy to offer international creators money to fly down and a bunch of money to show up at an event. Like, way too much money. I'm going to be honest here. I'm not even worth that. But for South Africans, nah. Like, you can get a day pass to our event. That's fine. You're settled, So it's very clear they know what the standards are, but people think they can get away with screwing over South Africans. And I detest that. So I want to make sure South Africans are paid what they're worth. Kids should be able to make a living off of this if they have the equipment and the skills to do it. I also don't want to sell a pipe dream to young people. I want to make sure they know what they're signing up for, because it's a job. But yeah, unfortunately now most of the opportunities come from abroad. You can make a real good living getting international opportunities. And that's what I really try to get our creators to realize. Like, come out of your normal streaming schedule, try some variety, try some competitive games with an international scene, make some contacts in that industry, and then come back to South Africa and see and compare the two.
I've never called myself a content creator. I'm an esports broadcaster, but I'm obviously not dabbling in the creator space. And before I would do the influencer thing where I'd post a selfie of me doing whatever, but now I'm trying to like actually make content that's worthwhile. But I've always said, when people have come to me from an esports point of view saying, oh, I want to get into esports broadcasting, it's cool. I make a living. I make a good living, but it's not from South Africans. I have to go overseas. And I always say that you have to think bigger, because we're also still growing. But to your point about how different it is with local brands when they're dealing with an international gaming creator versus a local, I've spoken about this on a few of these episodes, and I call it the Starbucks effect, where I do find it really fascinating how our focus is, and it is a South African thing. So you lived in Cape Town, Cape Town to me has some of the best coffee stores in the world, best coffee, small little artisan coffee places. But when Starbucks came to South Africa, there's queues around the corner. And Starbucks is great, but there was far better, cheaper coffee down the road. And yet I do find it's a bit of a South African thing that, like, if it's international, they completely understand what the worth is, but they seem to, I don't like the term disrespect. It seems very negative, but there is a sort of a disrespect to South African creators and what they've achieved. Have you seen that at all? I mean, now that someone figures out that you actually are, because I'm sure this has happened where they've gone, oh, wait, she's South African. There's like a belief that maybe they can lowball you, or you'll be more open to working for free. Have you experienced that Starbucks effect?
It's actually sad. And again, when people rewatch this, I don't want them to think that we're talking about how much money we're worth. It's more like I've gotten what I wanted, if anything. So I'm shocked that my fellow South Africans aren't getting that compensation. It makes me angry. So I want to help our people get to where we made it. If they really put in the work, they should be able to. No, if anything, I'm getting far more offers because people are starting to see me like an international instead of a South African. And keep in mind, I am still very much South African. I've got a visa that allows me to visit America 6 months out of the year. I'm trying to get a work visa now so I can work here more permanently. But yeah, if anything, I'm getting offers that are more international. Like instead of using rand, we're using dollar signs. So I would say that is about the extent of the difference. Like instead of asking for 400 rand for an appearance, you replace that with a dollar sign. It doesn't make a difference to them. It's suddenly times 18. It's fine since you're an international creator. I mean, that's what you'd expect, right?
I mean, that's how it should be. And I think we both know $400 even for like a daytime appearance for most overseas creators wouldn't really even be the rates. But we don't want to talk about like paying lots of money. And it's like you said, I also think that there are a lot of brands and marketing agencies that are trying to do right for the gaming space in South Africa. So we're definitely not sort of, I don't want anyone to think that we're slamming all of them. We're just saying, hey, there is a space here. But this is the question. How do we improve the scene for South African creators? In your mind, what is the way forward to ensure that some of the more predatory brands or marketing agencies, or maybe they're not predatory, maybe they're just uneducated, are no longer, and ignorant, are not in this position where they can take advantage of gaming creators in the space? What is the way forward for us?
I completely get that. Yeah, so my goal is to do it sort of from both ways. I'm trying to get more international brands to notice that we have a South African scene and then sort of rail them in and connect them to people appropriate for them, which is what I'm trying to do with Nexa. Because I mean, a lot of times when a game comes out, you'll have the world map and South Africa will be nowhere to be seen. I don't think that's on purpose. I think people genuinely don't realize that South Africa has a gaming scene. It's the same with Twitch. We don't have our own dedicated server. We don't have our own dedicated rep to set you up on the front page, get you partnerships. That's crazy if you think about it. So my goal is to go about it from both ways. When I'm in South Africa and try and find more South Africans to join our team. And when I'm abroad, which is most of the time, I try and get them to make deals with Nexa, and I use our players and I say, hey, this is what we have. Would you like to work with us? We have an amazing scene here if you didn't know. And I mean, we have some great opportunities and your brand isn't here yet. So, I think we could make some cool projects.
Do you think there's also a lot of South African creators that are just unknown to everyone? This is something,
yes.
we started this conversation where I said, I found out about you from an international friend who said, hey, I found another South African, and I got super excited. I started following you. But since then, I've started to see there are so many South African gaming creators doing the most incredible things, but they're not at the local events because they're really busy with work, or they're not necessarily in the conversations that might be happening online in very small groups, which is just creators speaking to other creators. I mean, are there those hidden gems? James, have you found them? Are you allowed to talk about them? I mean, I'm curious if they're suddenly all going to pop up and be signed to Nexa.
I mean, we have found some of them, and there are even bigger ones I've discovered in this journey, and it's ridiculous. They have zero contact with South Africans, but they're in South Africa and they have made it on an international scale. And you're right. Again, we have a very niche community, but I don't want to go as far as say that 10% of us are in that niche community and the rest don't even know about it, because again, that was the position I was in until recently. And again, a lot of my friends who are partner Twitch streamers from South Africa, they also only kind of know about this community, but they don't take part in it because there just isn't a way to get people into it. I think we have to do more advertising to get people into it, because the resources aren't finite. There is an exponential amount of opportunities. We just have to create them. And I think people like resource hoarding. They're afraid you might steal sponsorships and stuff like that. I think we can truly make more space for people in South African communities. We just have to go about it the right way. I still don't understand why there are so many Twitch partners none of us know about who exist in South Africa, but they're doing so well. I don't think they feel the need to reach out to South Africans. Like you said, we are all trying to find international brands to work with, and we're all pretty happy with that situation. So Yeah, it's a hard one, but yeah, I found some South Africans who escaped South Africa. I'm trying to rail them back in, and we're making it work. We're getting there.
I think it scares brands and marketers away a little bit sometimes if they jump into these conversations and they see what's happening online because it is isolated to a very small group, and it comes across as very immature. And I worry that it's one thing for us all to stand up and say, hey, we know our worth and you need to respect us, we're running businesses. But on the other hand, if you're looking at that online, you're going, well, are you? Because this looks a little bit less business-like. Exactly. Yeah. And I wonder if there is a way, if we're all standing up together saying, okay, as a group, we're going to communicate and talk, and also not necessarily fight brands, but maybe as a group go, okay, we have a conversation about a brand and say, listen, we're not happy with maybe the creative, and maybe as a group we need to speak to them, because for me, the power in the rest of the world sits with the creators, and it's your communities that these brands want to access. But I worry in developing countries like South Africa, the power sits on the other side, because there is a belief that the money is the only way to develop, when in actual fact, I'd argue that community is how you build. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I never take part in Twitter drama. I think that's the thing. It's just very unprofessional. People don't like that. And honestly, back when that happened, the goal wasn't at all to actually make a dent in the way the hosting people were thinking, or the company, because that's not how you get through to them. They'll just say anything to quickly make sure the situation doesn't become a PR disaster. It was more to show South Africans, look, all of us who are actually asking to take part in this are not happy. This shouldn't be the norm. You should know better, you guys. Don't sign up for free when you are worth more than that. And the goal was to really make sure other South Africans realize that this is not okay. When it comes to communicating with a company like that, I could easily have behind the scenes have quickly negotiated for more for myself and just kept my mouth shut. But really, that wasn't my goal. My goal was for the company to realize, hey, we can't take advantage of all these people without this becoming a reoccurring thing, which I'm making sure of. Next year, if things happen again, it's quickly going to become a thing. I'm going to make sure people know their worth right off the bat. And if not, I'll make my own event. Because honestly, this is a little pet peeve of mine that I've noticed throughout the years is sometimes companies get away with some things because there is a monopoly. And I started doing my own events and registering my own business now under the pack. So I do bi-weekly online events, and you make thousands and thousands of profit with these events. It scared me, and I realized just how much companies do make and how easy it is to pay creators properly. And now I hire about 10 people, I pay them very properly, and I still make profit. So I just realized, really, if you can't answer from a consumer perspective, you just become the provider. Start hosting your own events, do your own thing. You don't need to please everybody. You can provide what needs to be provided, put in the work. It's as easy as that. So yeah, there's a lot of future projects in the work. If South Africa needs more opportunities, we'll create them. It's as simple as that.
I love that so much. To get back to what you were talking about for someone watching, there was some online conversation around an event where some of the creators were taken advantage of. And what was great is two of the international creators involved, who are South Africans that have gone on to do things overseas. Thea was one of them, were quite vocal. And with that, a lot of other creators felt brave enough to be vocal as well and stood up and said, actually, this isn't right. And it was the first time we've actually seen something like that happen, because a lot of the time it's exactly what you said. People go behind the scenes, they negotiate their own deals. And that kind of leads me to another conversation, because I'm sure there's brand representatives and PR people watching this going, hey, but hold on, we're not always evil. Because there is also another problem where a lot of creators have possibly burnt bridges. I mean, I would stand up and say when I first started out, I didn't quite know what I was doing a couple of years ago. So there's a very good chance that I messed up along the way. No one was doing this. So, I mean, I've watched a lot of my esports broadcasts and I've cringed. I was like, I can't believe anyone actually paid me to do that. So I do think that like that happens as well. And creators aren't necessarily always on the good side of the story. How do we as a community change that? Because that is something that the business side of this is completely new to a lot of people.
For sure. Again, this is why I started doing sort of both sides. It's I'm also the first to critique a game or a developer or an event, and then you do it yourself and you're like, wow, this is hard work. This is very hard and it's so easy to mess up, and everybody comes down on you. And you also learn that you have to resolve this and you can't make everybody happy. It's as simple as that. So I have the utmost respect for people actually in the industry to help. But in the same breath, it's like the same I'm finding out with many charities in America, which is another project of mine and a pet peeve, is charity has become a business and it's not being hidden. Like your Veterans for America received something like $180 million in donations. They used about 172 million of that on the company CEOs' like salaries, and that's public knowledge. So it's become commonplace for people to use something a lot of people like and make it a business. The goal is profit. And that's where we need to distinguish it. So if we have an event and they're quick to resolve it and they truly want to keep people happy, then they're for the people. If not, they're for the profit. And we don't like that. As consumers, we hate that. So I don't really care about those businesses, and it will become clear in their acts in the future what they're putting first here, because in my mind, South Africa, we're very vulnerable people. We don't have a big voice in the international community. We need all the help we can get, and that's why I'm trying to do that with Nixa, and we're trying to empower all the people online to have a voice in this, and that's all you can really do, I think. As for the businesses, reach out to creators, have a talk with us. We'll help you for free if that's what you'd like. You let us know what your goal is and we can help. If anything, we've been very helpful up until now. I think we've done a lot, and I think that's why most people were so sad, because it felt like they took advantage of that and just kind of left us all behind. And there was no thanks in the work that went into building what was initially just a community event. So yeah, I think we just need to stand together as creators at the end of the day.
Because you have this insight into content creation, specifically gaming and esports on an international level, are brands and agencies, are you open to them coming to chat to you if they're looking for consulting advice or just suggestions on how they navigate the space? And on the same page, are you open to creators who are looking to expand their offering to reach out? Is that something that Nixa is now going to be, I suppose, a portal, if you like, where people can do that?
Yeah, so I do that all the time. Again, I don't ask people money for these things. Like I hate putting a barrier behind like knowledge or insights. Like I'm the type of person who says, tell people what your salary is and make sure you and your employees are getting the same pay, Yeah, I don't really have brands asking for these sort of things. I do have creators asking for these sorts of things, and sometimes they're shocked if I have to reiterate, hey, you're worth money, especially big creators who haven't reached that point yet. It's like, hey, you have to ask what you are worth. You can't just take this and that and keep doing your thing. You're 34 now, maybe. Are you going to do this for the rest of your life? Like, how are you building your worth upwards? If you're starting off as a young creator, you have to know that every year you should be having more worth. Your time should be worth something, or else this isn't the industry for you, Maybe your 9-to-5 job will give you a comfortable salary that you'd be more than happy with. But, in this volatile line of work that you and I do, you have to make sure you're actually building your worth. Like, we're at a point now where we can criticize a company and get away with it. Like 3 years ago,
scared. Yeah.
No, I would not have done that, which is why I'm a bit trigger happy, because suddenly I'm not even in South Africa, so I can get away with it. I'm not going to burn bridges by criticizing South Africa. But I'm doing it because I think it's necessary. So, yeah.
Thea, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for chatting to us. I do hope that some of the people listening and watching reach out, because I think you have a base of knowledge, and I'm very excited to see what happens with Nixa. I've been doing a special series here on Tech Girl Talks focusing on the business of gaming and esports in South Africa, because I feel like there's these conversations that are happening that a lot of businesses and brands and agencies don't necessarily know. And this is an opportunity for them to get a little bit more insights into esports and hopefully avoid some of the snake oil salesmen that exist in new developing scenes. This one's going to be quite fun because I have Johnathan with me from Bad Weather Productions. And I mean, Johnathan It's an interesting one because actually you don't only do esports. You do esports, but you come from a background that's far more interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we actually come from a background in entertainment, specifically music production for live spaces. And we kind of stumbled into esports just because we really enjoy it. And we've kind of been doing it for the last 3 years, and it's been an interesting journey, that's for sure. I definitely don't think we do esports particularly. It ended up being something that we kind of grew into over time, with our passion being in entertainment. First and foremost, that's kind of how the business got started. So yeah, it's been a very interesting.
I was going to interrupt you there and say you've worked on some of the biggest music festivals and productions in South Africa.
Yeah, we've been very lucky to have some great opportunities to work with some great musicians, great festivals, great shows, projects like Rockin' the Daisies. We've worked on some of the Ultra Music Festival stuff. We've done Cotton Fest, which is like a big hip hop festival in Johannesburg. We do Corona Sunsets. So yeah, we've touched a lot of interesting projects throughout the years. And yeah, I think that the intersection between entertainment and esports is becoming more and more connected. And I think there's an interesting conversation, like exactly what you're doing here today. How do we have that conversation with brands wanting to enter the space? And we obviously see brands heavily involved in the entertainment space. And how do we, transition that same conversation into esports? Because we need brand money to really bolster the space.
So you said you stumbled into esports, and I use that exact sentence when I explain how I find myself in esports. So I'm curious, how did your trip and stumble happen?
Well, I mean, all of us have some sort of interest in technology. That's kind of how we got into this space, right? Which typically led to us all kind of being a little bit nerdy at some point. Still to this day, for the most part, we just have maybe a bit better fashion sense from time to time. But we all, used to, a lot of the guys that work on the team are old friends of ours. We're very, very close as a team. And we all used to LAN back in the day together, play games together. We still kind of work on PCs all the time. And a lot of the stuff we do is essentially gamification of some kind. So even if we're working in using real-time visuals, for instance, for a show, what's typically a game engine like Unreal Engine. So the natural intersection into gaming just kind of was always there. And then the opportunity to work at an esports event with Comic-Con and Telcom kind of presented itself. And we were like, well, this is awesome. How do we, grow this as a business? How do we grow this? How do we support the industry? How do we interject ourselves in a way that adds real value to the community and to the space, and not just coming in to just sell more of the same? And that's kind of been the natural process into the space. It's just literally been a bunch of guys and girls in our team who are like, well, let's just do more gaming. It's fun. It's something we're passionate about. It's something we enjoy watching here in the office. So it was just a natural progression, and we've just been really interested in trying to understand the technology, because I think the esports space is really pushing the boundaries on a technology front that I don't think people in the entertainment space and the production space truly understand and appreciate. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunity for us to kind of get into that space, which we have been very lucky to get the opportunity to do. And we were able to do that even at Red Bull Kumite at the World Finals last year, and recently now at the qualifiers. Taking all those learnings and kind of bundling it into something fun and interesting. So yeah.
So you mentioned that you watch a lot of esports in the office, and now obviously I'm coming from a place where I know a lot of your team, so I know that they're big gaming fans. Do you think that is important for this space, is to have a little bit of knowledge about the games themselves and esports in general, as opposed to someone coming in who has no idea what sort of competitive gaming really entails?
No, I think the key factor is that you have to care. It is business after all, and that's great. But if you don't understand or want to understand what is needed for this to be a success, I don't think you're going to have a successful event. So you can be great at production, but if you're not passionate about what is the narrative we're trying to get across? We're just using technology as a tool to tell that story. So, from my perspective, it's how do we create tools that can enhance people like you on the desk? How do we give you guys access to that information that can tell a better story? How do we create graphics that tell a better story, that we don't have to sit and have, we needed graphics and we didn't think about that, we can't have it. How do we have something that we can access at a moment's notice? That's, I think, where the success lies, not in necessarily understanding the game. I think there is, of course, if you're passionate about something and you really want it to succeed, you will by default immerse yourself into that space. I don't think you need to be a passionate gamer to be good in the production space of esports. I think you have to be passionate about the success of the show that you're involved in. And I think that goes across anything that we touch. It's kind of a base point for us. Like, you have to want to do it. You have to want the event to be successful. You have to enjoy the music you're producing or being a part of. The same with the esports tournament. I think that's where a lot of companies fall short, is that they just don't care. And it's not a knock on anyone. I don't think that at all. I just think that they don't realize the detail that goes into this, and the attention to detail in which the fans want information, and the way they want to engage with the esports broadcast in particular is totally different to anything else. Because it is often a two-way conversation. Things like online chats and stuff are so different to like a traditional broadcast. And I think that being open to immerse yourself in that space, I think sets you up for success. I think it's not a guarantee, but it definitely sets you up better than just saying, I know this and we're going to do it the traditional way. I think what esports guys are doing in productions overseas is really pushing the limits because they're willing to take risks. So you would call it like bootstrap approach, and I guess that's how it grew. But that's what makes it really, really cool going forward, is the guys are willing to take chances and go like, well, let's just do something different. And I think I think we're starting to see a unique style of broadcast that has become its own niche, right? Esports broadcasting is its own niche now, with its own set of unique challenges and talents that are producing these shows. So yeah, I just think it's about passion, really.
For sure. And something you mentioned there about sort of pushing the limits and changing things up. Do you find, because this is my experience, and I know that maybe my experience isn't the same as everyone else, but I do find that sometimes South African brands, South African agencies are a little bit scared to try something new. So they have a very specific picture of what they think a live production needs to look like. And if you say, hey, change it up, there's always a little bit of nerves to not be in control of that. Do you find that is something that you've experienced, or is it a little bit different for you?
No, 100%. I think when people want to enter the gaming space, especially brands, it's one Google search and you're either going to see, an ESL major and everyone's going to say, oh, that's the sales pitch, or it's going to be, oh, gaming, let's throw a PS5 and call it a day. I think that there's a lack of understanding around doing the research to enter the space in an authentic way. And I think people are bundling the idea of gaming and esports as one header. It's like saying sports. People who do cricket, and it's a completely different approach to doing rugby or soccer. And I think that trying to understand the niches within that and people within the different spaces will, create a lot of success long term. So are you trying to talk to the people playing FIFA? That would be a different approach to talking to the people who play CS. And I think that there's a lack of research that's potentially happening on an agency level, and lack of understanding in that space. And it's kind of bundling everything together. And then you kind of land up with this mishmash approach where it doesn't really feel authentic, and not for lack of being authentic, but I think it's like you take too many ideas and force them together, you kind of land up with a weird recipe. I think that's really what's happening. Because it's not that brands don't want to be authentic and agencies don't want to be authentic. They really are trying. I think that they maybe are too scared to make changes because there's a lot on the line and everyone's really hyping gaming at the moment. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I think they're just trying to focus down and be specific. What is the intention with this? What are we really wanting to say with this? How do we want to connect with the audience? Those questions aren't really being answered. It's like, we just want to get into gaming, which is, I guess, typical for brands new in the space, right? They don't know. So it's also our job to educate in a way that is gentle and kind and compassionate with them. No one's trying to make a quick buck off each other. Everyone's actually trying to enter the space and trying to add value to their consumers. If we don't educate them and say, well, we'll ask the right questions, then it is going to feel unauthentic and weird. So yeah, maybe it's on us.
Do you think as well, because one of the experiences that I've seen is obviously there is an expectation for a lot of people, they watch esports overseas. So they see a stadium filled with people They see, I mean, Red Bull Kumite is such a good example. It came to South Africa, this massive stage, the lights, the production, and they kind of want the same thing, but it's difficult for them to wrap their head around the fact that that's going to cost them a huge amount of money, and they probably aren't going to get the same amount of eyeballs on stream. I like to call it the Starbucks effect, where I find a lot of South African gamers will watch international shows, but they're less likely to focus in on South African stuff. I mean, is that also an expectation we need to balance, where it is very much a matter of you're not going to fill the sports stadium right now?
100%. This is a problem we experience in entertainment as well. Everyone watches Coachella, and we want Coachella. We just don't have the numbers for it. There's some core fundamentals that we need to maybe understand and educate. Again, this is the responsibility of us, of the community, of everyone in the space, to not lead brands down this fake rabbit hole of I promise you're going to get a full stadium of people watching games. That's not going to happen right now. It's just not. So I think the most honest way is to think about, well, how do we get to that point? Well, in my opinion, I think the best way to do this is let's build community. Let's build the gaming community. So instead of focusing on trying to fill an entire stadium, let's focus on doing community events that really are cool, that really engage new gamers that have never picked up a controller before. Let's make the space safe for people to enter, feel that they're welcomed in the space. Let's try, flush out some toxicity with gamers and make sure that we can build it. The more we keep it closed, the tighter the community will be. It will never grow. We'll never have those experiences here, because the goal is simple. It's ROI. Like, there's going to be some sort of measure, and it's going to come down to the amount of people that eyeballs on streams. So I think things like live streams, as much as we love producing that, I think that we need to be careful that we're not selling a live stream for the sake of a live stream. Strategic decisions need to be made on how we spend the money on a show. And I think that building community and building the show from an experience standpoint for the people on the ground and building that is more important than trying to put a live stream together for 10 people. So it's about, I guess, responsibility of funds as well.
And for you, if you were to take a look at an esports broadcast or an esports live show, what for you are the markers for success? If you had to say this is what makes it successful, what would those things be?
I feel like that's a loaded question. I think engagement. It's going to come down to engagement. Was it entertaining? I think that's the measure of anything, right? Did people have fun making it? Did people have fun watching it? I think sometimes there's a disconnect between people having fun for themselves doesn't really translate into the show. So we need to create entertainment at the end of the day. But if the audience really engaged with the space and with the broadcast and they really thoroughly enjoyed it, they'll typically, this is the beauty of esports, I guess, and any online content, is they talk back directly to you. So things like World Final had such a great response in the chat. As I was calling the show live in the venue, and I was able to watch the chat in real time and see what people are saying and be able to feed that back. Are we winning here? Are we losing here? Can we make any adjustments on the fly? I think that's so unique, and being open to that, I think that would be success for me. What was essentially the success in the chat is always kind of, unfortunately, as rough as the chat can get sometimes, it is a good indicator of success. And did the players have a good time? It's always something we try to chat to the players afterwards. Did they actually have a good time? And listening to people like yourself, like the talent on the show, getting feedback from them. You guys are brilliant at what you do. We do production. Like, it's important to have a holistic feedback. Was this a success in your eyes, in the players' eyes, in the audience's eyes? I don't think we have a standard of measure yet. Maybe that's something we need to work on as industry. Maybe you have some insight from overseas working on those shows. What would classify success? I'm sure they have massive numbers that they're trying to hit. I think we're working on a different metric. I don't think we can copy what's happening overseas in any way, shape, or form, really. We kind of need to reinvent it for the African market as a whole.
Isn't that quite tough with the live chat feedback, though? Because, I mean, obviously I've worked on enough productions to know that things go wrong, right? And for the most part, you can hide them. But it is very difficult when you have a live chat pointing out those very things that have gone wrong. And I can imagine for you, it must be tough, because I know the client 9 times out of 10 is watching that live chat as well. So for something that they might not have noticed before, they're much more aware. I'm sure that must make your job 10 times harder.
I think they just hold us to a higher standard. I think that's not a bad thing. I think that, yeah, you need to have the thick skin and take some things with a pinch of salt. You're trying your best. You're going to get drawn apart for it sometimes. That's okay. So change what you can change. Take it with an open mind and be like receptive to feedback. I think there's a lot of people in the space who are not receptive to any kind of feedback. They, maybe they think they know it all, or they're trying to do something their way, but not being willing to change. I think that the whole point of this space is to be adaptable, right? Like, and without being open to feedback, you're never going to improve. You can only see things from one perspective. So you have to trust your team around you. You have to trust the audience. You have to trust the talent team around you, and rely on that feedback loop. So it is tough, and it's very public. It's having your debrief live on air in the chat. It's ruthless. So there is pressure, but I think it's a good thing. I think it elevates the standard and it calls out like nonsense. People should be entitled to good production. I think it's as simple as that.
When you say good production, though, so this is always a bit of a difficult question, but I think it's important. And again, my experience, maybe it's not yours, I find a lot of the time when it comes to South Africa, there's an expectation that they want the good production. So the production that they would get at, say, a Rocking the Daisies or a big fancy live event. But because it's a new developing industry, there is an expectation that that level of production needs to come at a much lower cost. Have you found that at all? Or have you found that clients are susceptible to understanding that good production ultimately isn't going to come cheap?
No, this is just unfortunately a matter of fact of the market, right? Everyone wants great production. Everyone wants a great show, a great experience. It is expensive to do. This is a challenge we face being on the southern tip of Africa with the exchange rate we have. It's just the nature of things. Equipment's expensive, people are expensive, and rightly so. It's not something we should shy away from talking about. But that being said, if you want to make an expensive production, how are we going to pay for it? And it's not someone's random money coming out of their pockets. We need to think about how we can bring brands into the space. And running an ad for a brand is not good enough. And you don't have any viewership. How are you selling the show? And I think that brands like Red Bull, for instance, are doing it right. Choosing to not do a live stream for the Kumite qualifiers was a great decision because all the attention, all the resources that are available for a show like that go onto the experience of the people there. And it's about choosing how to spend your finances wisely. I don't think it needs to be expensive. I think it needs to be spent wisely. And the client's expectation needs to be managed about what is a reality in the space. And then together you sit in what is the most important thing. And I think that there's ways and means to, cut down on production costs. And I think that people maybe set the bar too high for themselves from day one. I think that cutting that back and thinking about player experience, the production will naturally follow as the money starts to flow in. But there's no need to put a huge production on for a small community event. I think focus on making it a great community event. That's as simple as that.
It's very true. And I also think some of the best events I've worked on are quite lean teams behind the scenes, like people that are, like you mentioned right at the beginning, super passionate. So you don't need 7 people to do one job, that they kind of are willing to get their hands dirty, if you like. So you can keep that cost at a more appealing price than some of these things. But now you said, like you mentioned, your company, you've been in this now for 3 years. Have you seen growth year on year? Do you think that there's been an improvement in what you've seen overall?
I think there hasn't been much of a growth in what we've done. I think that there's been more of a breadth in what we've done. We've seen more people into the space, but we haven't seen the events get bigger. I mean, I think World Final was like a one-off Easter egg, if I'm being honest. We can just be grateful that they even chose to come to the continent, which is awesome. I think it's super inspiring, awesome, but I don't see that being like a yearly thing. Projects like Comic-Con and the things within that, like the VS Gaming and Red Bull, and those things are recurring, but they're at a fixed scale because the community size is fixed. So again, back to my point, how do we grow the community? Then those events will naturally grow on their own. It's not about making a bigger production. If anything, that's actually going to be more of a bad decision for those brands to grow the production. The conversations we're having now is how do we scale back and make it more money being spent onto the experience rather than, is it worth pumping this money into the broadcast or into this big stage production? Is it worth it? that's a conversation, everyone needs to have on their own terms. And how do we bring more value to the brand? I think that's another big conversation. A broadcast for 30 people just feels a little bit out of balance. Again, we love doing it. It's what we do for a living. So I don't want to oversell it. But in the same breath, I think it's irresponsible to sell something that isn't going to work year on year. And then it's just going to end up having to fold and the event will stop. I think that for me just doesn't make sense long term. So I haven't seen like the growth in the space. I think there's more interest in the space. And even more reason to, act responsibly and not just pillage from these brands that will then never return to the space. I think it's about fostering great relationships with brand managers, educating them, trying to give them opportunities to really see with their own eyes what the space has to offer, and then helping them make the right decisions with their money.
So if I were to say to you that I have an unlimited budget, you're obviously a gaming fan, you watch esports, and I say to you, I have an unlimited budget, go ham. I'd obviously have to give you a little bit more, I suppose. So say I said go ham, but I'm going to give you a standard Comic-Con or a standard Rage. Do what you want. What would you do?
I mean, I probably wouldn't use all the budget, if I'm honest. I probably
enough.
would say that we should maybe do more than one event, because doing something like that feels a little exclusive and maybe oversaturated. So how do we maybe take that budget and divide it over 3, 4, 5 cities, do something interesting, go to people where they can't access these spaces. Those spaces are saturated. Like, it's not a bad thing, but if you really want to reach the broader gaming markets, I would say obviously the first conversation, like, what do you want to do with, what is the purpose of this? Why are you entering the gaming space? Who you want to talk to? But if I was being completely honest, if I was creating something, I want to create something that is be a fantastic intersection of like entertainment. So you kind of want to trick people, come to something cool, right? Come to something you wouldn't typically want to go to. You know, a lot of people will be like, I'm not a gamer. You kind of want to trick them with some music, right? Or some other great experience. And they come and you're like, there's gaming. And they were like, I never knew I was a gamer. This is actually so much fun. You've won someone in that space. And that'd be the one side of things. I think there's a really great approach to that. And look how many gamers, how many musicians are actually playing games. I still have this big dream of maybe doing like a cool grand final at a big music festival stage one day. And it would be really, really cool, opportunity. But anyway, the other side would be taking gaming to people who can't access it typically. I love what Red Bull Hit the Streets did. I think that's really cool. I think that's so interesting. How do we take that further? How do we, access people that are typically not exposed to this? They're not an opportunity. Everyone, it's easy to go to these, big events. It's kind of the same group of people every time. How do we access, where's the new group of people that are coming up? How do we go to small towns that don't have these events? Make something really great for them, something memorable for them. I think that would be super interesting. I think that would be a better use of money, in my opinion.
I do agree with you. And I've said this for a while. I was like, how do we get outside of the Cape Town Joburg bubble, right? And find these places, because there's gamers, that we've such a big country. And it's also interesting what you said about the, people don't think they're gamers. And I've seen this so often where a lot of brands will they'll just drop a console, they'll do an activation and they'll have a console there where you can play FIFA, you can play a Street Fighter, or they have a sim rig. Those are always busy, because 90% of the people I meet will say, I'm not a gamer. But if there's a game to play, they're playing it and they've played it before. So even though that they might not identify themselves as a gamer, they're actually big fans. And it's like you said, so many of the musicians as well, a lot of the sports stars, there's this entire community of people who would be so excited to get involved without even realizing it. And we've got to find a way to say, hey, like, it's not just the nerds at a Comic-Con or a Rage, right? Like, come hang out with us. Like, you are actually one of us. You just don't realize it. Plus, if you do come out and hang out with us, you'll probably have a lot of fun. Because I think that's something that people miss, is that it is a very welcoming community most of the time. You are going to have fun. You are going to find people with very similar interests to you who you can talk to about these things that you love.
100%. I think, music festivals particularly have focused a large amount of their energy on inclusivity. They obviously all have a niche about who they're wanting to talk to. But the goal is to make it a safe space for anyone to come along, right? Feel welcomed, feel like they belong, don't feel like they're under any form of like pressure or duress. I think those things are like super important to try bring into the gaming space. Those are like learnings from a more mature industry. How do we take those learnings and try package them, not copy them, but package them for the space? I think trying to make the gaming space accessible and welcoming, I think, is the first key to just unlocking this kind of ceiling we have of the community members. Trying to unlock that and make it more accessible, I think, is literally the goal. Make it a safe space for people, and trick them into having fun. It's going to be the win, right? Like, that's the same thing with music festivals. Why there's always these activations and all this other stuff, because it's fun to do. Like, you'll turn up and there'll be so much cool stuff that you haven't, like, you go to a music festival, you're going to find new music. That's an exciting thing. You're going to interact with a brand that you haven't interacted with before. That's going to be an exciting thing. The gaming thing is exactly the same thing. Problem is, how do we get them through the door? And I think that's going to be the challenge. If you can crack that nut, I think then you're going to have people really pouring through these events. I think brands are coming onto it very well. The kind of hide gaming with pop culture. A lot of people that stumble onto the gaming floor are actually there for pop culture. That's why I think, as an event, it does well over a standalone gaming event. But then how many people turn up and play? Their kid. I mean, that's like so great to be able to like experience gaming in a unique, safe space. And that's the. I'm not saying do a pop culture event. I'm just saying there's a toolkit that exists to make people feel welcome. And we're not doing rocket science here. It's gaming. It's fun. The competitive side, the money, the careers, that will come over time. That will build over time. But the goal should be, how much fun can we have today, and how many people can engage with that fun. I think that's as simple as it should be. I think we overcomplicate it way too much often.
I think that there are brands and agencies that are hopefully listening to this or watching this that have some ideas and know ways they want to make it fun. And I hope that they'll reach out to you to chat about that and Badware. And of course, now, if you are a gamer and you're at a music event and you think all the cool kids running around with all the equipment are the cool kids, no, they're nerds. They're playing games as well. I'm well aware that entire office is pretty nerdy, and you can have a full-on conversation with them about top-level League of Legends, and they'll be able to answer every single one of your questions. Johnathan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you chatting to us.
Thanks for having me.